And we're here.
Hello!
Hello! La la la. Hello, all. Welcome to Monday Night Generational Change. I'm Jen.
I'm Peter, and we're not in the same location.
No, we're not. Yeah,
Thank
so
you,
I'm
that
not sure.
little voice. Much obliged.
Thank you. I'm not sure exactly what you wanted to start with. If you want to start with
I
your
think,
venture, or if you want to start with me making a
no,
statement,
because
or
I
what you
wanted,
want to
I
do.
wanted to, I want to talk about, RFK, obviously, with Sean when he comes on. I think this is a very good opportunity for you, considering that we haven't made a public post in any capacity
Yeah,
whatsoever about what's going on. I think it's a lot easier to kind of get lost in everything that's been going on. I think that it's an extremely hot button issue, and even though it's been a couple of days now, still very fresh. I think you should have the opportunity to say your piece and what this means to you. This is very personal for many
yeah.
reasons. And I think for those who have obviously been paying close attention to what's going on in Israel, it's very devastating uh, for a lot of innocent people. And this is not something much like Ukraine that just started yesterday. In fact, this goes back a very long way. So, Jen, please share.
Yeah. So, guys, we've talked about this many times on this show. I have a series we've had on this show, several episodes, Deconstructing Zionism. I've spoken many times about my sort of realization, my sort of come to Jesus moment about how we were lied to as kids. We were taught a mythology. And when I say we, I mean the collective, for the most part, Ashkenazi, Western educated we Jews in this country. And this started, my dad's generation. So anything post-Holocaust, right? We were very, very indoctrinated and brainwashed. And as I sit here and I look at all of my family and all of my people, of course, are hanging up their Israeli flags and they're go, go, go. And it's very, very devastating to me because I feel like they are all on the wrong side of history. And all I would say, honestly, is I urge people, because it's really, the information is out there. We have access to the information now. We don't need to believe a mythology that Israel was somehow a barren land and didn't bloom until the Jews arrived. And regardless of what people, anybody that's, I would say, my generation or older, so I'm Gen X or older and potentially even younger, we were taught, hands down, Palestinians, that wasn't a thing. We were discouraged from using that term. We were taught that Palestine wasn't a real place. It was never legitimate until it was the state of Israel. All of the people in the area were referred to as Arabs. And the Arabs were, whether or not they were Lebanese or Syrian or Jordanian or whatever they were, whether they were Palestinian, didn't matter. They were all Arabs. And we were taught that Arabs were less civilized, that they were filthy, and that they hated Jews and wanted to kill Jews. We were taught that, like indoctrinated from a very young age. And this level of fear-based and Zionism is what is still governing people like my congresswoman. And I see them put out this sort of sentiment that is just so unbelievably ignorant of facts that we all now are privy to. And there's really no excuse. So for people, and Peter and I were talking about this earlier today, like for me, anybody in Congress, anybody with a platform, anybody who has access to information at this point and does not acknowledge the Nakba and does not acknowledge that Israel is an illegal occupation and does not acknowledge that they're in violation of international law and just keeps waving their Israeli flag, they are one of two things. They are either being willfully ignorant or they're lying. That's it. Those are the choices. That's to every single one of these people, because the information is out there. So to pretend like you don't know that that happened at this point is absurd. You are all on the wrong side of history. And what makes me sad the most for like people in my family that I know are good people and they mean well, but they're just not really educated. They're just repeating the same talking points over and over. And I am against violence. I'm against violence against people in general. It's just not my thing. But my question for people, for like the Zionists, and my mother-in-law was all like clutching her pearls, like, oh my God, they're attacking us. And it's like, yeah, and that's horrible. But the Israelis have been mowing the lawn over in Palestine for decades now, and nobody has cared. And again, this isn't a whataboutism. It's sort of like, if we don't understand how we got to this point, and the bottom line is violence begets violence. The level of violence that is necessary in a civilization is determined by the oppressor, not by the oppressed. And my question to the people that are so pro-Israel, my question for you is, what are the people in Gaza supposed to do, right? What are they supposed to do? You just want them to just stay in their little cage and be quiet and accept it. They're not allowed to have outside help from Iran. They're not allowed to basically live and be that way. And for people like to not see this as equivalent to what we did to the Native Americans, how we treated Black people and slaves, and how I don't understand how they don't see the equivalency. But I'm going to say this, and I am specifically going to say this to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, because you are a liar if you are saying that you don't know the truth about Israel. And you know what? What else? This is the thing. It's a racist state by definition. It's a racist state by definition. That's the facts. If you don't want it to be called that, then actually create a state that's a democracy for all people that live there. So long as if it's an ethnic state, it requires an ethnic cleanse. That is not democracy. You can't have it both ways. Pick one. You want your Jewish state, or you want to have a democracy. They're mutually exclusive. It's like Jews for Jesus. And people like her, she knows that it's a bunch of crap. But no, you wouldn't stand up to AIPAC. Oh, let me tell you, she has access to this. She knows this. I am like just beside myself. And for anybody who does not know the history, this is not the time to get into all of it. But needless to say, Israel has no honor. Israel does not understand proportionate response. Israel is bullies. They are basically like a meaner version than we are with the natives. So it'd be like, let's build electric fences about our indigenous reservations and start policing them as they come in and out. So it's not only putting the natives on reservations, it's then policing them in fencing. And we're not supposed to think of that as somehow racist or apartheid.
Yeah, the problem, of course, no, it's not. And again, it's a much more serious issue. You, of course, are, as you've pointed out many times, and why this becomes a lot more relevant with your voice is because you are a Jewish woman from the second biggest Jewish settled area in the country, and frankly, the world, North Miami Beach, Florida.
Well, when I was growing up, we were the second largest Jew, and we used to call it the ghetto. I mean, it was a Jewish ghetto. We had more per capita Jews than anywhere but Brooklyn. And that's why I know that how these people were raised. And I know that they are taught this, and we were raised racist against Arabs. No doubt about it. They feel superior. That's the way it is.
Well, that's an issue for most cultures. Anything related to otheringisms and stuff like that. I've always said, the biggest issue that the Jewish community has is that when you purport yourself to be the chosen people, i.e., you are superior by birthright to other people, you're naturally going to have an adverse response from others who will look at that and say, that's not correct.
I'm not sure if you're being sarcastic. I'm sure he's being
sarcastic.
I don't know. Do you know this person?
I don't, you've seen them before? I think you have to accept.
Seriously, the problem with an ethno state is that you cannot have one without conducting an ethno cleanse. They go hand in hand. Now, if you were to find some place where a bunch of white Jews were literally the only people that ever existed there from the beginning of time, and no one had to move or leave, and they could just set up their little perimeter and be a Jewish state, then fine. Maybe there would be nothing wrong with that. But that's not reality. That's not how that happened.
Well, and Ray J, friend of the show, brings up a point about how many kids Israel killed this year alone. Listen, the only thing you need to know is that in the last 48 hours, give or take, there were 100 Jews that were killed, obviously many that were wounded. And of course, the real big issue here is that there were a lot of Jewish women and children that were kidnapped.
Send Sean the link.
Yes.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
know,
guys, you know what? I've been really digging deep into this for the past couple of years. Like I made this sort of pact with myself that if I'm going to take this stand, I have to really know my shit. So I have been doing I've learned more and more, and it gets worse and worse. And it's really very, very unpleasant. Which is why most Jews, Western Jews, don't want to hear it, because it's very, very unpleasant. I say it's the equivalent of not just learning Santa Claus isn't real. It's like learning Santa Claus is a mass murderer. Okay. It's very disturbing for Jews to really deal with this. And a lot of people are just not capable mentally of handling that. It's almost like it would just be too traumatic. Their brains would just explode.
well,
But
well, you,
that's what we're dealing with.
Sean, well, it's very traumatic for individuals like yourself because of what you've been told and what isn't so. So, for example, like I said, there was over 100 Jews that were killed in the last 24 hours. And of course, as T.M. Martin, friend of the show, points out, 11 Americans were killed. You know how many Palestinians have been killed in the last 24 hours? Over 500. So, again, there is no equivalency to what's going on. And
And
there's never
yeah,
going to be.
blacks congregate in certain areas, Asians congregate in certain areas. I have no problem if people want to live in little ghettos, live in your little hoods. I don't really care. That's not the same thing as an ethno state. Different people don't have different levels of citizenship. It's okay to have a majority of
Yeah.
any population. In Japan, majority of people are probably Japanese, but that doesn't mean that the other people that are citizens don't get to vote. So it's not, it's just, that's just not how that works.
And Edward, here's what you need to understand. You can think whatever you want to think. The reality is, if you've been paying close enough attention, people agree with Jen more than they agree with you. And
I'm
that's
a
something you're going
radical leftist garbage human.
but that's the
Wow.
reality that you're going to have to come to terms with, that a lot of people don't want to have to come to terms with. See, the
I have
overwhelming
to come to terms with that. I'm
No, no,
good
no,
with
no.
it.
You're not
Oh.
listening to me. What I'm saying is that people like Edward, the people who would tell you that you're wrong, you're
I
terrible,
know.
you're this, you're that, and the other thing. You've even said, years ago, maybe even in the last decade, it became this sort of conundrum of, you may be saying what's true and what's correct, but the overwhelming majority of people are still stuck in that, Israel is perfect and Palestine's bad. Today, the response has been overwhelmingly positive and fairly even.
Well, it's
Granted,
like
there's no.
anything else. I mean, look at civil rights, look at everything. It takes a while. And then people start to kind of come over, once it's a little bit safer to come over. And this is something I've always wondered, guys, like I've always wondered if I were alive during civil rights, or came from an area where it was not convenient or comfortable or acceptable to do the right thing, would I have had the courage to do that? Would I have stood up? And I never really knew what that was. And now I get what that is. And I am so at peace with it. Like, I got to tell you, it is the easiest issue for me to talk about now than it has ever been. I am so resolved. And I think that is just a testament to how educated on this I have made myself. So I just feel like, the talking points and the name calling and all that stuff, it's really irrelevant to me. Like, I'm really
Right.
good.
Well, the good news is, and what we do on this show, which is what we've done since the inception, for those of you who are wondering, yes, our esteemed guest is here.
He is here.
Our goal is to transform politics into service. And one of those components of doing that is making sure that you have cross-pollination, as Jen likes to say, with a lot of different thought leaders in this space. People become way too set in their ways and do not want to hear alternative opinions, or especially alternative political leanings. People just want to be stuck, debating amongst themselves about how terrible the other side is and things like that. That's why talking about my trip today to Philly to go to the RFK event is going to be a good topic of discussion, because that was one of the things that he highlighted, is how do we sort of bridge this divide. There are many theories to that. And there isn't, again, I wouldn't necessarily even break bread with somebody like a Ben Shapiro, but at the end of the day, most of the people that have differing opinions about politics, you really have to be willing to bring different voices together, different viewpoints, because that's how we get to a consensus of a better future, better opportunities for everybody. So without further ado, he is a friend of the show. He is an exceptional YouTube streamer who not agree with everything, but man, if he doesn't make really salient points about a lot of very relevant topics of today, you know him, you love him, Sean Fitzgerald, the actual justice warrior. Welcome back to Generational Change.
Oh, thank you for having me on, and thank you for accommodating my Monday schedule.
No, absolutely. Thanks for coming. Hey, Sean, how's it going?
It's good. I mean, I just came back from Miami. I wasn't expecting breaking news to happen, but it always happens when I'm away.
Yeah. All right. So Peter really has like the best story. I mean, do you want to get into what do you want to get into? Do you want to get into the RFK thing, or like what's your primary thing where you want to cross-pollinate with our friend here?
Yeah, we'll grind our axe a little later about wage theft, but in the meantime, I think the experience was very unique. I went to Philadelphia early this morning, and I was lucky enough to get a press pass. And RFK was able to make a speech that I thought was pretty effective. I think he did a good job in terms of what the overall message is, which is uniting the country. As simple and as silly as it may seem, we've seen hope and change, make America great again, build back better, these silly little cliches. And you're like, man, that's so dumb. But you know what? The three of us are stuck in a political echo chamber of understanding this in a way that the average person doesn't, and doesn't pay anywhere near as much attention. But if the message that RFK is espousing is unify the country, RFK all the way, that's going to have some juice. And I think right now the country is in desperate need of having more than the two options of Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And I think that Bobby presents an alternative that is probably going to be a lot more attractive to a lot of voters, and I think a lot of people think. Your thoughts, Sean?
I'm not a big RFK guy. I do think that he's running on, honestly, the Kennedy name more than anything else. Like, that's why he was so popular outside of the gate. And I understand that he's like very popular in online circles and all that, but I don't think he has a legitimate chance. I do think they should run a Democratic primary. He's polling at 18%. So I do think.
So, but let me ask you, what's your policy beef with him? Like, what other than you think that he's not necessarily like really, working it, but just working the name, which his name absolutely affects this. There's no doubt about it. It is 1,000% a part of this. I think he's right on some things. I think he's wrong on some other things. But I still find it infuriating that the Democrats refuse to have a primary. And therefore, I 1,000% hope that he shakes some shit up. That's why, because it's not okay to do that, what they did.
Right. I mean, look, like RFK, a lot of people get on board with him on the right because of like the COVID vaccine skepticism.
Yeah.
But he's like, in general, like vaccines and autism kind of guy. Like that seems to be the direction where he's coming from, because I remember him being considered like anti-vax before. So like that like weirds me out. I'm not really in I'm not really like interested in that part of it. I mean, granted, like you can still run for president. I just don't agree with that. But he's in that old like, and I think people forgot about this part of the left, because if you remember, the people who weren't taking the measles vaccine were like Hollywood people. Like the most, that's where the outbreaks were happening. So he's in like that portion of the left. I don't agree with the mischaracterization that he's on the right all of a sudden. But yeah, just he has bad record on guns and like other things that I just wouldn't be interested in.
Yeah.
So would you say you're more on the libertarian side of right-leaning politics?
I consider myself more libertarian. I used to probably be like a pure libertarian, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, we've talked to him. We know him.
Yeah. But a lot of libertarians are, in my opinion, are out to lunch on the crime issue. So like, it's like at some point you break with the the general like I could say I'm a libertarian and I've stayed in the same place, but if most of the libertarians are on like this track and I'm not
they're
there,
moving, they're fluctuating.
well, I will say
You're where you are.
I moved a little bit too. Like I can't say it's just them. So, but it's
So
also
who
like
are you liking? So who, are you like Trump? I forget. Like, who are you liking?
So I thought for the Republicans to win, I thought DeSantis was a really like solid candidate. But the problem with DeSantis is he signed that 6-week abortion bill.
Yep.
And if you got killed in terms of the if you got killed in the midterms on Roe versus Wade, which just kicked it back to the states, you're gonna get killed on the 6 weeks thing. Like it's just
Poor
like to me that
politics.
yeah, it wasn't, and he already signed a 15-week one, which gave him credibility in the primary. And I actually found it hilarious that Mike Pence, who was like the religious conservative, gave this big speech about how Nikki Haley was a coward on abortion during the first debate. And then he said 15 weeks is the line, which this guy was like the most pro-life guy ever, like 10 minutes ago. But now all of a sudden, even he realizes that's a bridge too far. So I think DeSantis made himself potentially like unelectable based on that issue alone.
So who is
well, it's always and it's always difficult.
That's the
when
question.
You have
who now? Who do you like?
I don't know. I really did like DeSantis as a governor. He's not perfect, but like,
let me ask you, you don't live here, right? You're not in Florida?
No, I don't live in Florida.
Okay, so let me tell you, and honestly, I don't, and I've been very fair to DeSantis always on this show. I've praised the things that he's done with the environment, certain things that he's done that are good. I've appreciated. I call it when I see it. I'm a female person and I have lost my bodily autonomy. And I got to tell you, I'm irate. And I'm not the only person that is irate about that. So we're going to be living for more than a year with a 6-week ban, even if we win on our ballot initiative next November. And the amount of women that are already having serious problems. We have women that are having to carry ectopic pregnancies, women that are carrying dead fetuses. The doctors are scared to do anything. Like, this is not good. Our women and infant mortality rates are going to be off the charts, and Florida is already a shit show for that. So it's not good.
It's to me, it's an unfortunate step by him, because one of the things that I liked about him, there was like that hurricane that happened and a bridge in the Keys got destroyed. And again, Sanibel. Yeah. And say anything you want about any side of the aisle, but like in America, we don't rebuild bridges in 3 days. And that bridge got rebuilt in 3 days. It was like, I actually think he's very technically savvy as like a governor, even though, like, you know, and governing, not just being the governor of Florida. And it's unfortunate that like he doesn't appear to be a good campaigner at all. So like, I really liked him going in, but like, I don't think he's winnable. I'm also like, I am pro-choice, so like the 6 weeks thing is essentially a ban.
Yeah. So. Well, most women don't know they're pregnant then. 15 weeks, by the way, already removes the whole point of having an amniocentesis. You can't. I had to have one with my second. You have to be at least 16, 17 weeks to even have an amniocentesis. So it's like anybody who you're basically forcing people to have babies with severe birth defects. It's really, this is not going to work well.
I actually thought the 15 was actually pretty arguable, because have you ever seen that map of the European like restrictions? Now, granted, they would have medical exemptions for things like what you're talking about for after that, but it was actually like more like liberal than that. But like people were reacting like crazy, and I always thought DeSantis was good at that strategically, where he would put something in place that people would overreact to, and he would be able to benefit from that overreaction politically. But like I don't know the specifics of the like conditions that you're talking about, but again, like I would be fine with like exemptions or whatever. I'm not like,
well, they have it, you know, our 6-week ban. You're allowed an exemption for rape or incest up to 15 weeks, but you have to have proof that you were raped and or that you had incest.
It's not a real exception. The problem is that any real exception could just be used as like not an exception, which is why I actually do think that the more consistent pro-life position is the no exceptions except for like health of the mother or whatever, right? So like I always find those like little, we're gonna have an exception for this, but like not for that. Like they're always like dubious and unenforceable. So Like I actually agree with some of the like harsher critics on the left with that analysis of that position.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because some of the people that are very hardcore Second Amendment, that are so into their rights to bear, and by the way, I have no problem with the Second Amendment, none whatsoever. But a lot of those are the same people that feel okay telling me what to do with my person.
Right.
And that to me is hypocritical. If you're going to be a civil libertarian, because I am a civil libertarian, I am very much about our civil liberties. I feel like be consistent. Either you support them or you do not support them.
Right. I mean, look, they would argue. I don't want to get into the whole pro-life.
Oh no, they say it's murder. I know.
Yeah.
Blah blah blah.
Like,
yeah, whatever.
Like I actually understand their position. If they think it's murder, then like they think it's murder. So it's like I actually like I understand that like position. Like again, which is why I don't agree with which is why in principle, if I were to be in that like lane, I actually would not agree with the exceptions because it's like murder, but this like so like I don't think that those make sense, and I don't think legislatively they're actually very enforceable.
They're not.
No. And of course, the problem is, DeSantis, he was a very popular governor, and his ego, as is often the case with a lot of politicians, ends up getting the best of them. I think without question, he passed the 6-week abortion ban because he thinks that he's going to be able to basically grab the evangelical vote away from Trump. And in some instances, especially in Iowa, I think that was his calculus, is that this is what makes the most sense for me. But as a candidate, he's not very strong. He's not a charismatic person. And the fact that Trump has such accurate political instincts, the fact that he came out immediately and was basically saying, we totally have to have exceptions for ladies when it comes to certain issues here. And it's like, he just knows exactly how to push that button that I think allows for
Trump has the benefit of like generally not caring about the abortion issue, because I saw a CNN interview before that, and he was like, oh, we'll negotiate. Like, we got rid of Roe versus Wade to negotiate. He's like, maybe we'll do 2 weeks. Some people are talking about that. Nobody's talking about 2 weeks. Nobody's ever brought up that time frame. And then he's
that's
maybe,
not even possible.
Yeah, he's like maybe 15 weeks, and then DeSantis signs that 6-week thing. He's like, oh, that's too restrictive, which savvy political move.
Oh yeah.
But like, that's because he has no this is what happened in the previous time where they asked him a question. He's like, maybe we prosecute the women. It's like nobody in the pro-life movement says that. Like, and he's just testing out positions, which is pretty like, I guess it's smart.
Well, we now have a mom that has been charged criminally for getting her daughter morning after pills, and is that's
is that real? Because I remember a case like that where they said like somebody was being charged, but it was like this could be a different case. So maybe
this is very recent. Like this is within the past couple of weeks. Like I just saw something about this, and I will check. But it's one of those things where people are going to be scared to do things. The doctors are scared to do things, and that's frightening to me. That's gonna now you're affecting healthcare,
right?
That's not good.
I see.
Yeah. Okay.
I was going to say, I see somebody in the chat, Ross, saying, "Are we running a popularity contest or trying to find the best person for the job?" Unfortunately, or fortunately, it is a popularity contest, and
that's how it works.
For the presidency, it is. For the presidency, it is 100%.
For any of these elected positions. So, like, I think a lot of times the best person for the job, quote unquote, is not the one that's going to win the election or going to campaign the best or whatever. Like, it is a popularity contest, and even that's kind of it's 50 different popularity contests because of the way our presidential election works.
I was very much enamored with Bernie's, specifically his first run in 2016. He ran a populist left campaign. It was fantastic. I was really involved. I thought a lot of his ideas were great. I thought his stances were, frankly, can't beat around the bush. There were a lot of them lined up with Trump, and a lot of that populist fervor was coming from. Of course, there was differences of opinion on a number of issues, but in terms of like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, like the trade deals and jobs at home and whatnot, he was very strong. But once it became clear that they were stealing the primary away from him, and he was not willing to fight for the nomination the way that he needed to and really expose what was going on, whether it was what Wasserman Schultz was doing or anybody else who was involved in the whole fiasco, He needed to step up and make a stand. And by not doing that, you are okaying the Democratic Party circumventing the electoral process, superdelegates, all of those things. And so I'm curious from your perspective, because right now it's painfully obvious that we have a president who is not cognitively there, and that is a very dangerous place to be. And the fact that they want to run him again, which almost assuredly, if he is reelected, will not make it through a second term. And then you're looking at, let's say, a manufactured Kamala Harris into the White House, whatever the circumstances would be. How do you foresee it unfolding right now? Do you think it will be Joe all the way, or do you think they're going to try to put, as friend of the show Kim Iverson has suggested, that it's going to be a bait and switch at the convention, that they're going to put in Newsom at that point? Or do you think there may be a chance where they might actually, especially if RFK is polling decent numbers, where they might actually just decide that they have to run a primary if Joe steps away, or if they ask him to anyway? Right.
I mean, look, I disagree with the Bernie assessment. I think where he really lost in both elections was with the older black Democratic primary voters. If you look at the order of the states after South Carolina, they're the majority of voters in like a bunch of the states. And like, he just wasn't doing well with them against Hillary, and he wasn't doing well with them against Biden. He did worse with them against Biden. So I think that's where he lost it. Did they not want him to win? Absolutely. Was there the incident where they fed a question to Hillary Clinton? Absolutely. Now, she answered that question terribly. Like, people forget about that. But I think that's where he lost. And like, you could say that's the organization of the states, but they really changed the organization of the states this go around to put South Carolina first in case there was a primary for Biden to win. But to the second point, I think it's Biden all the way. I think he's gonna run, and I actually think he has a really good chance of winning. Like, a lot of people are like down on his prospects, but like, he overperformed almost everyone in the midterms. And, that abortion strategy, especially depending on who they nominate, the guy who appointed the justices to overturn Roe versus Wade, Ron DeSantis with the 6-week abortion ban, like it's not gonna go well for that. So I think Biden is the guy all the way. I actually think Newsom, and people don't believe this because they're like, he's young, that he's charismatic. All that's true. But Newsom banned gas-powered vehicles in California. Right now in Michigan, in part, the UAW strike is due to the fact that they have to make more electric vehicles, and that requires less workers. So they're trying to lay off the workers that they need. Like, Newsom is a nightmare in the key states that you need to win in order to become president of the United States, these key swing states. So I actually don't think he's a stronger candidate. Conversely, one of the things that's very underreported is that there was an announcement with Kamala Harris, and she announced this in Philadelphia. And it was that they were going to try to use federal regulations to make sure, like the Inflation Reduction Act funds, if you get that money, you have to pay prevailing wage, even in the southern states where they have right to work and they don't have the union wage. Now, the reason she announced this, what people reported weirdly as a pay increase for the southern workers in Philadelphia, is because it's not intended to be a pay increase for southern workers in Philadelphia. I'm sorry, I'm southern workers in that aren't that are in the South. It's meant to raise up their wages to redirect some of that Build Back Better funding to Michigan, to Philadelphia, to Pennsylvania, but like Philadelphia, to all the states that Biden needs to win. So like right now, while Trump is fighting his court cases, while DeSantis is floundering, while Newsom is like pretend running for president, the Biden administration is making sure they lock up key constituents in order to make sure they can win in 2024. So I actually think he has a really good chance because there's a lot of money that he spent that he could redirect. And I think it's going to, I think it's going to lead to a very difficult path for any Republican because the incumbency matters. It's a big advantage.
It does.
Because he's already the president. And once we get to the conventions, the race is tightened. So Biden might be down in the polls. Go look at Obama a year before he trounced Mitt Romney. He was down in the polls. Like, so I think it's Biden all the way.
That's interesting. Yeah. See, and I don't think he can win again. I don't think he can win again because I am one of the people that's in the faction of people that held my nose and voted for him, and I will not do so again. And he barely won. So I don't feel any enthusiasm for him. I don't see anything like that at all. Whereas Trump has so much enthusiasm behind him. Even RFK has so much enthusiasm behind him, and Biden really doesn't. He really doesn't. And so I think, especially now with RFK and Cornel West running as independents, I don't see how. I don't know. We'll see. It'll be very interesting. I feel like we're going to all regroup afterwards, but I really do not see how he can win when he barely won last time, and it was more like Trump lost than
I will
won.
say, like, it's not set in stone that he's going to win, but I think he has a better chance than people are giving him. And remember, there was no enthusiasm for Biden last time, and after South Carolina, he ran over everyone. And Biden was broke going into South Carolina. Like, people forget about that. He was broke going into Super Tuesday, and he had Michael Bloomberg, who was stealing staffers from him and convincing donors to cut him off financially because he thought he could outperform him. But after he got that South Carolina momentum, it was over. Like that there was no chance. In fact, the only thing that gave Bernie a chance after that was winning California, which was moved up in the primary order to Super Tuesday because they thought Kamala Harris needed it in order to secure her nomination. And she was out of the race for like 3 months already at that point. So I think Biden has a really good chance. People are very much like underestimating it. And like, you know, you could say like he should step away, he has dementia or whatever. The guy's been trying to be president his whole life. He finally has it. He's going for the second term. And Trump had enthusiasm, Bernie had enthusiasm. Enthusiasm doesn't necessarily win the race. Remember, Biden has 8 people at his rally. Well, he's the president now. Like, you know.
I don't know. We'll see. It'll be very interesting to see what happens.
No, I'm more in your camp, Sean, than Jen is. I do think that Biden is without question the most vulnerable incumbent since Jimmy Carter. That I do believe, and because of where the economy stands, without question, I think there's been a lot of misfires in his. I mean, again, to me, he's a borderline disaster as a president because I think he needed to really come in as a populist left representative of the country, and his decision making has been, I mean, again, whether it's his decision or not, that's all of the story, but the decisions of the administration have been extremely shaky. That's putting it very nicely. I cannot stand when they play heavy into the culture war. That is not what matters in terms of governing the nation. It matters that you protect people, especially the most vulnerable, from adverse treatment. That goes without saying. But when you turn, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I will say, but Biden did win by a very narrow margin. Like the popular vote, like doesn't mean anything in our country. He won by a narrower margin. Trump's margin was like 70,000 votes over 3 states. Biden won by 20,000 votes over those 3 states. So it was a very narrow margin.
Right.
And honestly, if Trump would have just, when he got COVID, said, like, I'm fighting this with you, and like, you know, and honestly, he should have also like pivoted attacks on his policies to like attacks on the first responders, like the healthcare workers, he probably would be president right now in this moment. But instead, he was like, COVID is nothing. I tanked it. Nice and easy. When like, you know, at that point, maybe 100, 200,000 people had died. Like, you know, and people can complain about how they counted those deaths or whatever. But point being, you see that counter on the news every day that says 200,000 people. And Trump's like, it was nothing, no big deal. Like, so if he would have shown a little bit, a sliver at that moment. And I think empathy is the most overrated thing in politics. But in a global pandemic, if you'd shown a sliver of empathy, he would be the president right now. But like,
yes, that's my point. That's my point. Exactly. I don't think, and you know, even I saw one of our people, Linda, in the chat that said same as me in terms of that she voted for him last time, but won't vote for him again. So I think that's a pretty sizable group of people. And so I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, if you're asking me what state I think it'll come down to, like, in my opinion, Georgia, because of where Florida is today, I think Georgia definitely swings back to the GOP. I think Wisconsin's probably a toss up. Michigan will go blue. I feel fairly confident with that. Arizona, we'll see. I think that could definitely swing red. But at the end of the day, I think the country comes down to Pennsylvania. It usually is a real bellwether, like, reflection of kind of where the country is in a lot of ways. And who, depending on who's there, it could. But again, we're pontificating a year out, and there's just so many varying degrees of possibilities
I
that can
believe
happen.
I believe Trump needs to win, like, of the 4 states that you named. I think he needs to win 3 of them, like, not counting Florida. Like, we're assuming that Florida is locked up for the GOP.
We're gone. We're done.
In
It's good. Yeah.
terms of the Electoral College, in terms of the vote splits, as far as what would need to go into the Trump column in order for him to win, he could flip. There's also the possibility that Nevada's in play. I don't know about that for sure. I'd have to look at more data for that. But if you flipped Georgia, Pennsylvania, and either a Nevada or an Arizona, that would get it done. And I think if you flipped even a Wisconsin, I would have to check the number. I think it's like 36 electoral votes is the split differential. So you're looking at 16 in Georgia, 10 in Wisconsin, and 11, I want to say, in Arizona. So that's 37. So that would get it done. So those are the 3 states. And if those 3 states flip, that's the election. So
I honestly don't think he has. I think Arizona is going to be gone, like, for Trump. I maybe the border becomes like enough of an issue that he could secure it. But honestly, Carrie Lake's running as a senator. Like, she's been denying the election in she's been denying the election for governor right now. So, like, I think that on the ballot, like, really hurts.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just
I think you're
being
probably
honest.
right. Even though I think that the lunacy of what Katie Hobbs did is the same as what Brian Kemp did in Georgia, the idea that you're running for the highest office in the state and you're also the Secretary of State who oversees the voting.
Okay.
Regardless of whether you committed impropriety, the fact that it looks like you did should be disqualifying. But that's, it's what it is. It's the political arena
That
that
shouldn't be an allowed thing. And if people don't realize what we're talking about when people who are in Secretary of State positions in the executive branch oversee their own campaign, their own election.
That's like one of the main jobs of that position. Like, so I mean, the only alternative to that is to, like, appoint the position, or, like, I guess you could try to ban them from running for higher office, but then it's like,
if you plan on running for an office that you would have to be overseeing as that person, then you need to step down from that position. That's how it would go for in our judicial branch. Like, that's how that should go. You should not be overseeing something that you're doing, right? Like, that's just completely not okay.
I mean, it's the job, though. Like, I don't know.
Right. So then don't run for higher, but then, so you step down to run for something higher, or stay in your position and enjoy it. Those are your choices. It's not complicated.
So
no, I think I could understand the appearance of a conflict of interest, but I will say this is like a very, the way that this is talked about normally, not saying you guys are doing this because you're saying both Kemp and Hobbs. But the way that this is talked about is super partisan. Like, when Kemp beat Stacey Abrams, they're like, oh, Brian Kemp shouldn't have been in that position. And then from the Democratic side, when Hobbs is in that position, same situation in Arizona, Republicans say she shouldn't be in that position. And Democrats are like, no, it's totally fine. Like, look at Brian Kemp. He did a good job. All of a sudden they forgot about everything they said about Stacey Abrams and that whole election. So,
but see, that's why you'll come on and talk to us, because we're not like that.
Yeah.
Well, you can't be, if you're going to, like, to the heart of the matter of, like, the things that we talk about, and this is obviously a great segue, for us, when you're talking about transforming politics into service, and where we definitely line up on the left politically is with labor. Now, there is a distinct difference between labor and unions, and we try to make that extremely clear, as is often the case. One of the best examples that I can give is that Sean Fain, head of the UAW, is adhering to the will of the rank and file of the United Auto Workers of America. Whereas, an example, like in New York, the teachers union, which is run by Randy Weingarten, who I will say that when Jen ran for Congress against Debbie, she was probably the most rude union member that union boss that I dealt with, who basically said, "Go kick rocks, I'm with Debbie," and that's where the teachers union is going. And the fact that she now sits on the board of J Street is just another example of this whole, there's no ethics anymore, so just do what we want. But in the case of, what you talked about the other day regarding wage theft, and I know you've mentioned it a lot, I'm very much of the mind that there is wage theft and that there is a certain amount of the pie that doesn't get shared properly. And whether that's because union strength, because of its interior corruption, there's no question that exists, especially when unions do not allow for rank and file decision making, or because we do have a broken labor system in this country that basically bends the knee to Wall Street and Silicon Valley. We have this huge gap, if you will, that exists now. So we're going to play a very quick clip, but just a basic overview idea of exactly where we're coming from when it comes to the idea of wage theft. So here we go, guys.
For Black workers, more so than others, loss of income is frequently tied to racial discrimination.
This network of worker centers is supporting motions introduced by LA Council members Hugo Soto Martinez and Tim McCosker. One would give the city more power to enforce labor laws.
On a yearly basis, working Angelenos lose about $1.4 billion a year, which is an average about $27 million a week. We know that this disproportionately affects women, people of color, and some of the most working poor of our city. And so when we're talking about the issues that we're facing in our city of homelessness, of poverty, of evictions that are happening across the city, this is truly, in my opinion, the difference between someone staying in their home or not, being able to take their family out to eat or not, or even having some of the simple luxuries of the city.
I am in not any way, shape, or form defending what happened in Philadelphia a couple of weeks ago. I think that YouTube streamer got exactly what she had coming to her. And as far as I'm concerned,
can you recap that to me? Because I'm not sure I'm knowing what you're talking about.
Sean, please.
Oh, he's talking about the Philadelphia riots. The after the Eddie Irizarry guy, the cop that shot Eddie Irizarry, there was a protest. And then after the protest, people came out, including I believe she's most famous on TikTok, but she was streaming on Instagram and filmed themselves going from place to place. And her nickname is Meatball, which is
But she was filming herself at protest?
No, she was filming herself at the riots, receiving stolen property. She basically filmed herself committing 6 felonies, which they charged her.
Has she been arrested?
She was arrested, and she's out on bail now.
Okay.
But the problem, of course, is that her attorney, and you even pointed this out, that your defense attorney obviously has to do what they have to do in order to get you, obviously get the charges dropped or
That's
at least
their job.
reduced. Pass, of course, but the fact that they decided to play the race card in this instant, it was just so out of context and so inappropriate. And what that ends up doing is it invalidates other people who are dealing with the actual ramifications of racial policies that still exist. Obviously, not to the degree that they once did, but there are people that are hurt by people like that who basically decide to do that type of thing.
Wait, are you going to draw the link between the Philadelphia thing and what we just watched, which was an LA thing? Are somebody going to explain that?
But the whole idea is that, Sean, you have mentioned that you don't think that wage theft is necessarily a thing. I don't agree.
That's not my position. My issue is whenever we're talking about the issue of people looting these stores or people, sometimes it's organized retail theft or whatever. I talk a lot about the 327 people that are arrested 6,000 times, which represent a third of all shoplifting arrests in New York City, and how we just keep releasing these people and then they go out and do it again. Somebody, and it happens on Sam Cedar's show. I recently criticized Brianna Joy Gray for this. Will say, oh, but wage theft is more. But that doesn't have anything to do with what we're talking about. It's like a deflection. It's basically problem B. I bring up a problem and then you bring up
what
another
about
problem.
This?
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with anything. I didn't say that.
You're talking about those sort of mob thefts that I've seen, these actions where groups of people. And the problem is you're saying they're not getting strict enough penalties to where it's really doing anything to solve the problem.
And by the way, in LA, they you know, one of the things I mentioned when I was talking with Sam Cedar is that a lot of this happens to like illegal immigrants, and like they're here, they don't have paperwork and all of that, but you're still supposed to pay them, especially if they're working on like federally funded jobs, the Davis Bacon wage, and they don't do that. Like, but they don't pay them that. And I think that's like number 2 is construction, but number 1 is tips, like people stealing tips from their servers or wherever you're getting tips from.
Sure.
Which is one of the reasons why I recommend paying tips in cash if you can, if you remember to bring cash to the restaurant or wherever. But
Yes.
I usually do because I was a waitress for like that was my former job. So
Waiter, bartender.
Yeah. So I generally do, but yeah, what does that have to do with wage?
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. If I haven't made that clear in my videos, I'm just saying that it's brought up as a distraction from what we were talking. Whenever retail theft is brought up, it's brought up as a distraction. Like,
wage that, like somebody says, oh, what about? Well,
Yeah.
Can't both things be true?
Yes, for sure. And then I remember specifically Sam was trying to claim that it's the same places that are being stolen from that are doing the wage theft. That turned out to not be the case.
That
They're
doesn't
actually,
seem right.
retail is 5th on the list, I believe, which still is high for like stealing from your employees. And this is like, you know, I remember there was a documentary about Walmart, but like Walmart employees will tell you this, that they'll work 42 hours, and instead of getting the time and a half for the 2 hours, that will be added as regular time on their next paycheck, right? That's technically the wage theft. It's illegal. It should be prosecuted.
Right.
But my point is like, if I'm talking about retail theft,
right,
or like shoplifting, like I want to, like I'm sick of that as a distraction.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, and Sam would have a much better point if, like, let's say hypothetically, we could trace that a certain sect of people that have been violated repeatedly by their employer were the same set of people that were breaking into that specific place and ripping them off. Still illegal. I still don't condone it, but I'd at least be like, you know, so, but I don't think that's the case.
Also, my second criticism, and you'll see this often, is that they'll cite a chart from 2013 on wage theft versus shoplifting, right? Now, wage theft probably today, like I haven't looked at the recent chart recently, I'm assuming it's more than shoplifting even today. Even if you take the National Retail Federation numbers, which they're doing a survey, and granted, like surveys can be useful, but it's the National Retail Federation. So like you take them with a grain of salt, and they're also measuring shrink, and then they break down the percentages in there. So people take the big number. But people use a 2013 chart because the disparity is greater in 2013. Like there's no reason to not use the updated numbers. And I believe I looked this up, and I still think that the wage theft was higher for sure. Like, but it was narrow. The gap was narrower, which is why people don't want to use it, because it looks better with the big ass gap. Like it's just a fact. So like that's the other criticism, but I never said this doesn't happen. Of course it happens. And I believe even that 50 billion number from 2015 was actually the amount they recovered like in that year. So like it happened so often they were able to recover $50 billion. So it definitely happens a lot.
Right. You're aware that it happens.
Yeah.
So Peter, you caught him out of context, or he was taken out of context. But
hey,
so let me ask you, Sean,
I'm not here to but I'm not here to sandbag Sean.
No, we don't do that. Sean knows that. We're not doing that. So let me ask you.
Well, I was just going to say, but that's something that a lot of shows do. They're just looking for clicks. That's not what
I don't want that. I won't debate. I'm not debating. I don't even want. I just want to talk to people. So what is in your mind, like what could be being done better, or what should these places be doing better that are seeing these spikes in this? And is it in certain areas? I mean, I know I've seen this happening. Like I know this is a real thing that's happening. But what's the solution? Like, what do you think needs to be done?
So like when you have 327 people representing a third of all arrests, like you have to hold these people. Like you can't offend 25 times and then just keep getting released. It's so comical in New York, because in New York we have this we have bail reform, which again, like I can understand arguments for reducing or even removing the cash bail penalties, but the judges in New York are also not allowed to assess dangerousness. It makes them unique in this whole country, or your propensity to reoffend. They can only assess flight risk. And they used to use bail as a substitute for like dangerousness by putting a bail amount on. And like it's an unworkable system. Like you have these stories. And again, it's literally an anecdote. We're literally talking about 300 people where these people will be released the same day from the station. then they'll steal from another store, be arrested again, and then release, and then steal from another store on their way home. It's absurd. So I just want judges to be able to hold these people that are repeat offenders. I'm not saying if you're a kid and you take a candy bar, we throw you in jail. But you know what? Like, you have to, if you break the law like 5 times and you're arrested for it 5 times, then eventually we have to do something a little more than release you automatically from the station or a night in jail. Like, we need some kind of deterrent, and you have to prosecute these people seriously. Again, this isn't, if you just got rid of these people and like they're being arrested 6,000 times, there's plenty of times they're not getting caught. Then
and by these people, let's clarify that you're talking about a certain group of people that committed an act of crime. Okay.
The 327 people that are repeat stealing from these stores. So like,
right.
And there's situations like this, and I pull up this chart from John Jay College of Criminal Justice that just shows like theft, like just all kinds of theft, petite larceny, right? Which is what this is. And it has the different categories, and every category is pretty much level, maybe a little spike here or there, but like people aren't mugging, people aren't doing any of this other stuff. But you look at the petite larceny inside a major store, and it's up 77% in 2 years. So it's like a line that just goes up dramatically.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say it's economic hardship, but go look at that chart, goes all the way back to 2006. Go look at 2008 and 2009, during the impacts of the Great Recession. It barely spiked at all. It spiked like 2%. So it's, to me, this is like an asinine policy that we have, and we can actually see the theft spike when it's implemented.
What
right.
would be?
So this is a New York problem specifically right now, what you're talking about, but it's a statewide, right? Like it's a state thing where
it's a major city. Yeah, it's definitely a major city problem. There's no question about it.
Well, it's not every major city. It's specific cities where they're not prosecuting these people, and that's the thing. When you don't do that.
I wonder if it has, and this is my cynicism here. This is where I get cynical, not just skeptical, because I kind of feel like I know things. But it's like this whole concept of arrest, release, like that whole cycle is extremely profitable. And something that I have learned is that when municipalities and criminal structures keep people in the system for long term, like in that way, it's very profitable. So I'm just wondering, because it's almost like they're recouping the money from the retail theft in their judicial costs, which these people will end up having to like pay probably and be on probation for eternity. And it's revenue stuff. Like,
but they're not really paying the costs. They're just being released. And it's like different in terms of like different areas. So Los Angeles doesn't have, not Los Angeles, like California as a state doesn't have the statewide bail reform law that New York has, right? They try to pass something, but it's different. But the problem that they have is that they passed a law, and I forget the name of it, where you can't go to a state penitentiary unless you commit something that they put in the violent crime category. So you have to end up going to the county jail. But the problem is the county jail gets overflowed, so people are being released from the county jail because they're like, if you, and by the way, they put some violent crimes in the non-violent category, which is absurd in my mind. But if you end up having like people who are like, let's say a domestic abuser or a shoplifter, and you're running a jail, you're like, well, I want to hold the domestic abuser for a little longer because this guy is committing physical violence, right?
Yeah.
And these shoplifters only sometimes commit physical violence. So like, so you end up releasing them. So it's like a similar situation. And then you see all these store closures and all these problems in like communities. And I can't stand I can't stand the fact that like nobody's solving these problems. And worse, people will protest when the stores close, but like not always, they're not always directing their ire at the politicians who made it like extremely unprofitable to be there.
Right.
That makes sense. But I also was curious as, your perspective, well, what would help mitigate a lot of these crime issues? I mean, from a populist left perspective, I have from the very beginning, one of the policies that Bernie was a big advocate for was tuition-free public college. I personally believe that the key is to have tuition-free trade schools, that people need to be able to learn a skill and not have to go into debt in order to do that. And the same is true if you want to go to public school. I'm even open to the idea that if you're going to get tuition-free college offered to you, that it has to be in an in-demand area of study, that you absolutely, like, we need certain types of employees in the workforce. If it's civil engineering, for example, like, to me, that would be an example of, okay, well, I'm willing to become a civil engineer. Can I get tuition-free public college as a result? And I want to become a welder. I want to become a mason. I want to become a plumber, whatever the case is. Like, to me, teaching people a trade and being able to work off of that, or a skill set that is necessary, I think we'd have a heck of a lot less issues regarding, these types of situations where you see people working in low wage jobs that are not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm gonna totally disagree, like, that this is connected to the issue that we're seeing, because what we're seeing is opportunistic behavior. Right now, we've like lowered the consequences for committing this crime, and this has allowed organized crime to come in here because there's like no consequences for participating in this. So you have people. I did a profile on a guy in Portland that was arrested. He eventually stole enough that they ended up giving him a real sentence, and he did an interview. And he was like, I was making hundreds of thousands of dollars on this stolen merchandise. And they asked him, did you worry about a security guard? And he's like, no. He's like, the security guards in Portland, they don't stop you. Like, they stand there. They're basically a scarecrow. Like, they're supposed to deter you by that, but they can't really intervene because it's more of a liability issue for the store. And this is something that Nike complained about because they contracted there's like a historic Nike store that was opened up. Black civil rights leaders asked them to come in this neighborhood, and it became like such a success. They moved it to a bigger store. So these people end up going to the store and they're stealing from it constantly. And they asked to have off-duty officers work there so that they could have arrest power. The mayor said no. That store closed. It opened up in the 80s. We had way higher crime overall in the 80s.
Yes.
They were able to function as a business while also promising to donate a portion of the profits from that area to the community, because that was the deal that they struck with these like civil rights leaders. So they're able to operate perfectly fine up until recently, when they stopped prosecuting these retail thieves. And like, they tell you exactly what they're doing. So you have to have a disincentive. The idea that like they're going to go and get like a trade when like they're making hundreds of thousands of dollars doing this. And I understand not all of them are making this. Some of them are also drug addicts. Like, so, there is an issue with addiction that you do have to address. I'm fine like talking about that. But the fact is, it's like, it's an opportunity. And by the way, a lot of these people who are doing this are also minors. So they're like, not, they're doing it for fun. Like they're doing it to make money. Now, granted, like, I know people are going to say they're in poverty, but like, this isn't like there's poor people that are working in those stores that are not making a good living and all that. And they're just stealing way more stuff from them.
I actually I agree with you. I think here's the thing. I know that, let's say in a typical, and this is specifically true for women's prisons, that more than 90% of the people that are in there are there for crimes of poverty. And by crimes of poverty, it could be anything from drugs, prostitution, bad checks, whatever. These are not scary, violent people, right? It's crimes of poverty. And those are not the same kind of people that I'm envisioning in what you're talking about. It's almost like these are people that are doing it for sport. They're doing it for some sort of showmanship. They're obviously getting off on it. It's like this sort of like flash mob theft thing. And that to me is not the same as like the people that I know who have been desperate and have done things to just be getting by. This sounds different. The people that are organizing these things are not necessarily the same people that are doing crimes of poverty. These are people that are using those people most likely to facilitate.
This is where I feel like I'm somehow like almost more on the left than even you guys, because it's like, I don't think anything about being in poverty makes you have inferior moral character that you're going to go out and steal. And like,
no, not at all.
We often see that this is like, oh, out of desperation and all of that. But one of the things I try to highlight, and like, by the way, I forgot what author labels this, that is that a lot of people adopt luxury beliefs because they don't have to deal with the consequences of their beliefs. And I feel like this is one of them, that these people are in poverty, therefore they steal. And one of the things I really try to focus on when I'm covering these stories is like, I did one out of the Targets that are closing. And there's a Target closing in Harlem where this woman works she's been working at the Target since it opened in 2010. She doesn't make a lot of money. She was like in tears screaming at the news person, and she's like, I scream at these people that they're ruining the entire neighborhood because this is like an anchor store in this mall, like it's like a mall strip in Harlem, and like that's going to affect all these businesses out there. So like the people who are struggling, like they're working at these places, they're losing their jobs. Target says they'll transfer them to like these other stores, but let's be honest, Target doesn't have extra slots at their other stores that they could just put these people to, that they're just going to stand around. Like once the store closes, they're going to eventually lose employees, and it damages the neighborhood. And it's just, to me, it's like there's nothing that says you have to steal if you're poor. And like
no, and I by no means think that that is anything having to do with that. What I'm saying is, though, and this is something I've realized as a mother, is that there's nothing you won't do to feed your kids. And that's why it's very specifically haunting to me about women that are incarcerated, that I know, what, because I got to tell you, there's nothing I wouldn't do. So I do by no means think that people that are poor have less morality whatsoever. But I just think that there's this universal thing where some people, you're going to take care of your kids one way or another. And I do not think that the majority of the people that are doing these flash mob things are in that category. I just, like, to me, I think these are separate types of things.
I just think that there's like people who don't like, I mean, I'll be honest. I think there's a lot of people who don't even shop regular retail. They order everything off of Amazon. Like they make their money doing jobs like us that don't feel the impact of this. They never go to these downtowns that are dying or anything like that. And they constantly say that like, oh, these, and I make the joke like that all criminals are Aladdin. They're all thieves with a heart of gold. Like they actually like adopt these beliefs. And again, I wish I remembered the name of the author, but he literally labels this luxury beliefs. And then I like to cut to these people that are on the street that are like, like I can't get groceries in my own neighborhood. Like right now in Chicago, and I looked this up, you need like 5,000 people to support a normal grocery store. In like the south side of Chicago, it's gotten so bad that Brendan Johnson is thinking about opening up a government-run grocery store. And by the way, they do have this in certain rural parts of the country where they just don't have the population to stay in a grocery store. But Chicago's the third most populated city in the United States of America. And you would think if it was competition or whatever, when half of these grocery stores close, the other ones would be doing better in business. But the thing is, we see all the Walmarts close. You're like, oh, well, Target should be the beneficiary of that. But then the Targets close. And we're like, oh, well, maybe people are going to go to like the Aldi. But then the Aldi's close. And it's insane that we're seeing this. It's obviously due to the theft, but people seem to be in denial of that. And I'm not saying you specifically, but it seems to be very prominent among the left wing.
Well, the thing that I know you've talked about in the past, and this gets back to the whole idea of, where does the balance lie, especially when it comes to labor? When AOC was being very vocal about not having an Amazon distribution center in her congressional district, you're talking about an organization that really exploits its workers. And by doing so, you're talking about the businesses that are there that, number one, can't survive. And then you're talking about people who need jobs and are going to take jobs. But you see so much more today because we don't have a federal living wage, if you will, or even a federal jobs guarantee where people basically have to take what's presented to them. So if Amazon, even in New York, is, let's say, paying, $22 an hour, which, to somebody who's living, let's say in Springfield, Illinois, they would think that that looks really good and that's, a decent paying job. But the fact of the matter is that's the equivalent of probably making half that or even less if you're in Springfield, Illinois. And so we have to find that balance of, yes, we are fierce advocates for small business entrepreneurship. I think it's one of the best, if not the best things that our unfortunately broken economic system does provide. We are a country that likes to support small businesses in general. We believe in small town America values in that respect. At least I'd like to think so, generally speaking. But there's also something to be said for big business and what that represents in our culture. And where is that common ground? Because there is a lot of crime of necessity, and I definitely agree with you that I think that there's also an element of what's created through social media, particularly on feeds like TikTok. I'm not a fan of what TikTok represents. I try to just use it specifically for work purposes, but a lot of the whole like smash and grabs and all of that garbage, I think a lot of that's encouraged, but I also think there is something to be said for feeling like the system is a failure in a lot of ways for a lot of people, and they just say F it, just throw caution in the wind and be like, okay, want to go around just rob people? I mean,
but you know what, though, I think that those are the types of people that use that as an excuse, and I do find that frustrating. It's sort of like everything else. Those are the people that ruin it for people that are truly just trying to struggle and get by. It's like everything else. So no, those people are the people that are doing mob flashing, looting, crap like that. They're schnurra, and it's not like a matter of, oh, I'm just desperate to feed my kids.
There's a comment right there that says Amazon is killing brick and mortar retailers, not crime. Yes, Amazon's competition puts pressure on brick and mortar retailers. This is 100% true. By the way, high interest rates, like the Fed raising interest rates, a lot of these places operate based on on money that they're borrowing, right? And now the price of money is higher. But the thing is, where the stores are closing are in the areas with the most theft. Like the Chicago Walmarts, the 4 of them that closed, they actually were never profitable. They were up and running, some of them for 15 years. Not a single year were any of those stores profitable. However, because money was cheap and because long term they thought eventually they would be able to turn it around, that they kept them open because they did have sales, but like they were never profitable because they always had an elevated level of theft. However, when economic conditions get worse, when the price of money goes higher, when Amazon is doing much better in online retail, like eventually, like that gives you a point where you reach a breaking point, and the people who live in areas with the highest rates of theft, they're the ones who lose their grocery stores. So yes, saying there are other factors, of course, obviously, but the thing is, and by the way, rents are higher in a lot of these places, so the cost of operating is higher. Sure, there are other factors, but it's no coincidence that it's the locations with the highest rate of theft. Like that Harlem store, though, that Harlem Target is closing. Harlem is in Manhattan. It has a high rate of rent, but guess what? There's Targets in downtown Manhattan that are open, much higher rent. There's in Long Island City, which is where that Amazon warehouse was going to open. It's one of the wealthiest areas, one of the most expensive places to rent a 1-bedroom apartment. And guess what? They end up staying open in that area because there isn't as much theft in that area. So yeah, like there are other factors. Sure, you're not saying anything that I don't already know about, but the fact is the places with the most theft are closing first. And like that's a problem. You're letting it get out of hand. And people try all these tricks to obfuscate this fact. They'll say, oh, it's only 1%. Meanwhile, they don't tell you that these major retailers like Walmart, their whole business model is selling you volume at 1 to 3% profit margins. Like that's the whole Walmart business model. So, but also they give you the national number that they're getting stolen from them. But if it's 1% on average or 1.5% on average for Walmart's total, that means some of those Walmarts are getting 5% of their revenue lost due to theft. And by the way, this happens not only from people taking stuff out of the store, but also from people who work at the store. But again, that's always been a thing where people steal
All right,
from their employer.
So then what would you for the South Bronx, for the South Side of Chicago, for the East Side of San Francisco, what is your recommendation? Like, how does the actual justice warrior see this type of issue being curtailed and being solved in the cities where it's extremely prevalent?
You have to prosecute it seriously. I know people think it's a minor crime. I know people think it's a major corporation, but you know what? I have the luxury of not, first of all, I'm in New York City, so there's not a lot of Walmarts. I have the luxury of not being reliant on the low prices of Walmart. But the people in the South Side of Chicago need a low cost grocer, right? They don't have as much money as I do. They're not doing as well as I do. Their cost of living is pretty high because they live in a major metropolitan area. They need those low prices. So like, I'm all in favor of small businesses. I'm not against them or anything like that. But the fact is, everything is more expensive at these little corner stores. And like the more people have to travel to go get their groceries and their basic necessities, the more they end up in the more distressed they end up. So the crime in these areas as I said a million times, is driving these people into further poverty. Like if you are paying, like $100 a month, or not $100 a month, let's be real, inflation. If you're paying $100 a week on groceries at Walmart, and now you have to pay $150 just because Walmart closed, you're significantly worse off.
Yeah.
Well, if that is the case, and there's this, I mean, again, the one thing that the liberal left tries to push constantly is that jail is not a deterrent. That's not going to stop people from committing crimes. I mean,
Yeah,
look,
I'm not saying it as a deterrent. I'm talking about incapacitation. So when I say those 327 people that keep stealing over and over again, that again, they account for 6,000 arrests in a single year. And they're still the same people the next year that are accounting for close to 30% or a third of the arrests. Like, I want them incapacitated. Like, if you get caught stealing 25 times, 100 times, like some of these people legitimately have 500 arrests under their belt and they keep getting released, then eventually we got to say, okay, they're petty thefts, but they're 500 petty thefts. We have to prosecute you. We have to hold you while you're awaiting trial and like at least sentence you to a year, because that's a year that you're not going to be offending. And by the way, misdemeanor means under a year in terms of sentence.
I know.
So like you'll be out at 8 months, whatever, with good behavior and all that. But we have to do something about serial offenders.
I think that is fair. I think that's
Yeah,
something that
I'm not arguing. I
on
mean,
that.
I don't have any sort of
Yeah.
problem with that.
Of course, the problem is that everybody just lumps everything in. I think we can all agree that here's a few things, and I think we can wind down the conversation on this point. We can all agree that Walmart is one of the, if not the worst representation of capitalism in America. The idea that they are the number one recipient of welfare is insane. That shouldn't even exist as far as I'm concerned.
That's
Then,
not
of
a
course,
successful business model.
no, it's not. It's a model that has bought the federal government and is allowed to get away with it. We always say on our show every time, corporate special interests have bought our government. It's that simple. And then on the other side of the coin, we have a for-profit prison industrial complex. That should not be a thing. There is no question that if there is a profit incentive to put people behind bars, I think what you brought up is a very good point. Sometimes I think what they're really looking for is to get people to reoffend and reoffend and reoffend to the point in which they eventually will reoffend in such a way that is going to put them in prison for a very long time and is going to make people invested in that industry a lot of money. And so everything, in my opinion, is always interconnected in some way, shape, or form in that respect. And I think if we could change that, that would lead to a lot more positive opportunities for a lot of people, just on those framework alone.
Somebody asked who are these like repeat offenders. Again, I always love to source my stuff. So you can go look at the 10 worst offenders for bail reform, and you will see people arrested. Total arrests will be like 98. They'll be arrested 78 times after bail reform, and most of them will be petite or grand larceny, and they keep getting released. I did a story about this guy. He's called the snake burglar in Los Angeles because he slithers on the ground. He pled guilty, no joke, 78 felonies burglaries. He was released in 4 months because they can't send him to prison. They have to send him to jail, because what ends up happening is that's not a violent crime. So they release him. And I made a joke about it. Like, I was trying to have fun. I called him like a supervillain because he's legitimately like slithering around like a snake. But yeah, like these people exist and they keep getting released. And again, it's not that like any reform is automatically bad, but you have to have some level of discretion. And the way that they write some of these laws are, if you commit a crime from this category, then you will end up being released and you won't go to prison, you won't go to jail. And to me, that's ridiculous because people quite literally reoffend in that category. And by the way, you just brought up a thing about how prisons don't make us safe. We had a significantly higher crime rate before mass incarceration. And when you can look at the charts from the 80s when we started, or from the 90s when we were ramping up the prison population, the crime rate was going down. And the Brennan Center for Justice, which is no conservative organization, attributes attributes up to, because they're not 100% sure, something like maximum 20 to 25% of the crime drop was due to incarceration. Now, they say it was losing its effectiveness after the year 2000, which is fine. We don't expect like, we're not going to get like one unit of safety for every person we lock up. Everything has diminishing returns. Everything has marginal utility. But yeah, at some point, you can over incarcerate. But yeah, for a while we were under incarcerating people. Like, it was just a fact. And by the way, I said in the beginning that I was like, I've moved away from some libertarian positions. And again, I'm not in favor of just incarcerating everybody en masse. I'm not a drug warrior. Like, I do think drug addicts are sick and all of that. But to say that holding people in prison doesn't incapacitate them, it's just wrong. It's not supported by the facts.
Fair enough. I don't think there's Jen, any final
Well,
thoughts?
I mean, obviously, I mean, I'm not a big fan of, mass incarceration. I'm not a fan of the crime bill that Biden wrote. I'm not a fan of any of it. That's just not my personal take. Like, I'm actually planning on being at the protest in Atlanta at Cop City from November 10th to the 13th. So I am not in that camp, but I don't disagree that repeat offenders who have histories, that it really doesn't make sense to let people keep getting out. Like, that to me doesn't make sense at all.
Look,
That's just a business transaction.
I understand that people aren't in favor of the crime bill now, but in like the context of the 1990s, like, you
didn't like
acknowledge
it then either.
No, that's fine. But I'm saying you acknowledge that crime was significantly higher in the 90s. Like, there was.
I acknowledge crime was higher. What I don't acknowledge is that that's the necessitates that particular solution.
That's fine. But I'm saying there's a context in which that bill is brought forward, and obviously there's some errors in there. But I actually find it kind of amazing that Trump is attacking Biden. Mr. Pro Cop, loves every man in a uniform.
Exactly.
Is attacking Biden from the left on that issue. Like, I find that to be completely wild.
Yeah.
And by the way, in certain areas, I will say there are prosecutors that are the problem. I think that's an issue in Philadelphia. Like, if you look at Larry Krasner and you just look at the murder rate since he's come into office, and again, there's an objective number. It's been going up. It's been going up, and then it jumped crazily more after 2020, but it was going up since he came into office. And somebody just said America has the most incarcerated people on the planet. Yeah, we have a high incarceration rate. Go look at our violent crime rate compared to any modern Western country. It's always been significantly higher.
I wonder why that is.
By a factor of 5, it's been significantly higher.
Yeah.
And like the closest
we're violent people. We're violent
people. The closest country that had ever gotten in terms of our homicide rate was Italy, which was 2.8 per 100,000, which is safer than most cities in the United States of America. Like, that's the closest European counterpart to us. So yeah, if we had crime rates as low as them, then I would say we should have an incarceration rate as low as them.
Guys, if you haven't smashed that like button, make sure that you do. This conversation is going to get out there.
I don't see why that makes me have a privileged position. I'm a hippie, man. Like, I'm okay with people owning firearms, but I don't own a firearm. It's not my thing. I'm okay with having borders, but I don't personally feel that I would need borders. It's not my thing. But I don't think that it's a position of privilege. It's more of more of a global mindset, and not being a fear-based mindset.
And by the way, if you guys disagree, I would totally like to hear your perspective or anything. Like, I understand. I know that for sure you guys disagree. Like, that incarceration is maybe even disagree that it's a major component to the solution. It's not
I don't even have, you know what, if we take the profit motive out. Okay. So first of all, that to me, first and foremost, has to happen before we can have a reasonable discussion, because once there's a profit motive involved, I feel like justice is out the window. Okay. So if you're talking about, we could get rid of the profit motive in corrections and policing. And by the way, huge profit motive in both. That to me is the biggest problem. So I am curious, like, how it might look if we got rid of the whole profit motive. I think it would change things significantly.
The private prisons represent something like 10% of, like, I believe maximum.
In Florida, it's huge. That's the thing.
But granted, I would get rid of that. I think it is a function of the state. They're private in name only because they have to perform a government function. And like, the state is choosing to give them money, and they don't They don't pay their guards well. They're not well trained, and that creates a bunch of problems. Like, one of the things that I'm like, so I'm big on the fact that prisons are not meant to be rehabilitative. They're not meant to be a deterrent. Those are secondary functions. They're meant to incapacitate people so they don't offend in broader society. That being said, we know that population density greatly, like increasing population density in prisons has great negative impacts on prisoners. So I would definitely like want them to build, even if you're not going to increase prison population, build just more prisons so that people can be spread out more, so that they aren't on top of each other. Like, you look at Los Angeles or California, but like Los Angeles contributes a lot to this. They have prisoners where they're all in like a gymnasium on bunk beds that are 3 rows high, and there's like 600 people in there, and we're like, wow, it gets so violent in there. It's like, yeah, you have all these people, a lot of them who already are violent criminals, stacked on top of each other. That's a huge problem. I think it's completely inhumane, and we definitely need to broaden it out. So I'm fine making prisons more like Scandinavian prisons, but we have to understand that our crime problem is significantly different than Scandinavia. It's different than any other European country. I think the closest we've ever gotten to a European country is 5 times worse in terms of the violent crime rate.
Yeah. So here's the thing, and here's something that we might be able to agree on. There's certain people that I have no problem with them being incarcerated. So I want to trade all of the nonviolent drug offenders for all of the pharmaceutical executives. And I think it would be a pretty fair swap. And I've put this out there before, that if we were to do that, then I'm actually okay with the prisons that are holding the pharma execs. I'm actually okay with those being for profit. So if we swap the nonviolent drug offenders with big pharma execs, I think that would be a step in the right direction for me as far as incarceration.
Look, there are major problems. And by the way, like, a lot of these guys got off scot-free. They made a ton of money, and like they have to pay fines. It's absolutely horrible.
Nothing.
I will also say, like, there is an unintended consequence that we did not factor in. So when we did the Medicaid expansion during the Affordable Care Act, a lot more people had access to these pills. And then the Obama administration did something that probably at the time I would have agreed with, where he's like, these pain doctors that are prescribing all these pills like crazy, we're going to crack down on them significantly. However, what ended up happening as a result is that they started cutting off their patients that were already dependent on these pills. So then they had no access to them. So then all of a sudden we unleashed a bunch of opioid addicted people into the general population with no other recourse. And they started using heroin. And now a lot of them are overdosing due to fentanyl. So I actually think, and this might be like sound crazy, but based on the way we got here, I actually think if you're already opioid addicted, then maybe we should have a lower standard for you being able to get your pills, at least until we can work out a program for you. Because a lot of these
You're
people
sounding somewhat progressive. Now that's sounding a little bit progressive there, Sean. I don't know.
Yeah, well, once you're already in a problem, like you have to like work with the situation on the ground. So I definitely 100% think that, like, in hindsight, by the way, because again, I was like, these horrible pain doctors, they're just chucking these pills out the door. A lot of them got kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies. They send them on dinners and all that, prescribe our pill. We've all seen and heard these stories. But the thing is, everybody was cut off at the same time. And then we have the opioid epidemic. Now, granted, a lot of these people were already addicted to opioids. Like, it's just a fact. But like, it wasn't a situation where they were on the street and like they had to go to the illegitimate market and all these other problems. So I actually think we need to like backtrack on that. And I know it sounds crazy, but make it easier for people who are already addicted to get the pills, at least to stabilize them, and then figure out a treatment plan. Because it's way easier to go through drug rehab when you have like a job. And
you think that sounds crazy to us? Do you know where you are? Have you seen Dope Sick? Have you watched the Hulu series Dope Sick? Oh my God, you really should watch it. It's the story about the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma and the whole thing with the OxyContin, and Michael Keaton plays this and it's basically historical fiction in that the characters are based on the real people, but they're not the real names of the people. But it's criminal what those people did. Absolutely criminal, because that was malintent. They knew what they were doing and they did it anyway. And they have had no real consequences to their life. What's millions of dollars of fines to those people? What is that?
Can I address one thing? So somebody,
Yeah.
Upstate Raider, says changing to a Portugal model. So here's an interesting thing. So the Portuguese model, and actually Anna Kasparian, of all people, of the Young Turks, did an excellent video on this. I highly recommend it. The Portuguese model, very promising up until about 2012, where they actually shifted from their original program, which had everything you've heard about Portugal is pre-2012, pre-2013. So they actually shifted to a different model, which is the current thing that is being copied by left-wing cities based on the good publicity for the Portugal model. So what they're doing in Portland, where they just like have these people, like they give these people needles and all this instead of having the injection sites where they're offered rehabilitation and all that, like that is actually the current Portuguese model, which they're switching back to, which ends up basically outsourcing to a lot of these nonprofits or NGOs. So Portugal's model, fine with if it's the original model. But what we're doing now is their current model that they're pivoting away from because it's been a disaster, and it's turning our cities into worse versions because we had a worse problem than Portugal has become. So yeah, I'm fine with the Portugal model. I've always said injection sites are, I don't know, 1 billion times better than needle exchanges because the needles end up all over the street. And like if you bring people to a central location, you could have Narcan on hand in order to deal with that. You can offer people, treatment and all that. And the main difference between the two models is that it was honestly more centralized. They did put more money into it from the government, and they switched it to a nonprofit model, which is very similar to what we see in San Francisco. And I have to be honest, and this can happen in a government system too. Whenever your job, it's like the homeless services. Like they don't actually, there's no incentive when you're making 6 figures dealing with the homeless to like want to get rid of like people being homeless. Like you actually want to prolong the program. So it's a more nonprofit model is the current model.
Yeah, we had on our show an author named Beth Macy who actually wrote the book Dope Sick that the series was based on. And she spent like a couple of years basically doing the research through parts of Appalachia and where Dope Sick really took place, where the mining communities were intentionally baited into this, knowing it was addictive. And there are several different programs that they have in effect that they've done a lot of like self-community help there, because that is a very forgotten part of the country. And there are facilities where they do have injection sites and stuff like that. And they are helping each other out. And a lot of this is very under the radar. A lot of it isn't something that is necessarily legal in places, but that is the solution. What you're talking about is the better solution, and is really what is needed because to me, this is a healthcare issue. This is a healthcare issue. You know, these people need to be helped, and most of them want help.
Well, that's like kind of a misnomer, because in San Francisco, they started like trying to offer people help, and they had zero uptake on the voluntary offer. Like you can look this up. London Breed try to do a crackdown and bring these people in and offer them treatment as an alternative, and they're like, no. Like, so some of these people need to be pushed in that direction. So, but I will say there's also something about the opioid epidemic that's on America culturally. So we are very medically illiterate. A lot of people believe if it comes from a doctor, it's perfectly safe, perfectly fine. The synthetic opioids are more addicting than like street heroin. It's just a fact. Anybody can look it up. And we see this issue with a lot of medical stuff. When people get antibiotics, they take them until they feel better, and then they don't finish their thing. That's not how you deal with antibiotics. That is how you create superbugs. So like people don't realize that that's like how to handle medicine and like what it actually is. So like we also have maybe a uniquely uneducated population when it comes to medical stuff. And I'm very grateful that I come from a family of like medical people. So like I always knew opioids were super addictive. Like I didn't even think most people didn't know that it wasn't super addictive, but
No,
apparently
I
a lot of
think
people had no
people
idea.
did, but Purdue.
No, I'm talking about the people who use these pills. Like I
Oh,
always
right.
knew that these were super addictive, but apparently this was not common knowledge, which I had
Well,
no
what
idea.
happened was that Purdue Pharma, when they came out with the OxyContin, what they did was they marketed as a non-addictive opioid. They actually told people that they had the pill that was not addictive, and so
You know where that
they
came
knew it
from,
and
right?
lied. What?
You know what so they cited a medical journal. You know where that came from? Like what part of the medical journal it was?
No, I forget. I mean, I remember that this was mentioned in the story about
Yeah.
the whole
So
thing.
it was a letter to the editor that was published in the medical journal. So technically, when they were citing this year's medical
Oh,
journal
right,
saying that
right,
it's
right.
not
Yeah,
addictive, it was true. It was in there, but it was like not from any study,
it
not from
wasn't a
any
study.
scientist. It was just somebody who wrote this letter, like, and they just cited that for years.
So do you
And
know the amount of deaths
people still
attributed?
cite that.
But don't you like there should be criminal liability for people
Yeah.
that did that. But when we're talking about like, most people, they don't do their research and they don't look into it and they don't know. And then as a result, what happens is the pendulum swings in the complete other direction and we get all sorts of bans and all sorts of like criminality. And we actually, interesting, had a guest on our show. His name is Carl Hart, and he's a neuropsychopharmacologist, teaches at Columbia University, and he wrote a book called Drug Use for Grownups. And he believes in complete decriminalization. He thinks it's not a criminal issue, that it's a health issue. And if people had access to information and quality products, that adults should be able to make the choice on their own as to what they do or do not put in their body, whatever, agree or disagree. But the research that he did regarding how ignorant people are in terms of, and not only ignorant, but then what we're given as synthetic is just, that's the problem. And if it were regulated and decriminalized, that would solve that a part of that problem.
So I actually prefer legalization to a decriminalization. Like I don't like this like half like, oh, it's okay for users, but it's not okay for here. I don't like that at all. But like what I would say is if you want to go back to the drug war, because I see there's like pushback in your chat, which I totally understand. Like it's your audience. But if you want to go back to the drug war, keep giving out needles in San Francisco. Like keep letting them end up in the street, like where kids play and all that. Like keep having these people, like now they're taking a new version of the drug that makes them look like zombies and they're like have rotting flesh. Like keep up that. Don't switch to injection sites and all that. Have days where 80 people in one city end up ODing and they're only able to save 25 of them. Like we're setting ourselves up, if you hate the drug war, for a huge reintroduction of the drug war, because people are going to see this as the only solution. Because honestly, a lot of these progressive places have botched decriminalization so bad that the alternative looks better, like and significantly so. So like,
well, I say decriminalization. This is why I say that as somebody who's like a lifelong cannabis user. The reason that I use the term decriminalization is I guess I'm always thinking of it in terms of, from decriminalizing cannabis and then it becomes a state issue to regulate and legislate and legalize versus having a sort of federal regulation on what we can and cannot do. I guess I just sort of like, if you decriminalize it from that perspective, then states can figure out what they want to do in terms of their legislation for it. I guess that's why I just think it's sort of like just more generalized than specific.
And again, I'll just reiterate, like, I'm all for 50 laboratories of experimentation. Like I don't like federal drug enforcement, like almost at all. Like there's certain instances where like, technically they regulate drugs like pharmaceutical drugs. So it makes sense to prevent like the importation of all this fentanyl that gets mixed in with these drugs and all that. But like, yeah, I'm fine with that. But like, if you want this like experiment to continue, if you want to move towards a situation where we're criminalizing drugs less, like you have to address what's going on. Like you can't have all these addicts on the street in Los Angeles. You can't have them all in Portland. Like it's so damaging to not only your cause, but also to these people's lives. Like you have to like, and I'm sorry, like you have to force some of these people into treatment, like period, point blank. It needs to be done. Like you can't say we're going to do a crackdown in San Francisco, arrest 100+ people in 2 weeks and have a 0% uptake and say, well, there's nothing we could do. None of them volunteered to go to rehab,
Right.
even though we're covering it and we're already paying for it and all that. Like, it's not a good solution.
No.
I think that it's going to be a long, winding road for a lot of people, especially because of, like I said, there's many reasons why substance abuse is a problem. There's many reasons why crimes of profit, and even necessity, become so much more prevalent in our culture. But I think we can both agree, Jen, that Sean, the work that you do is very important, even though people may not like you and they may not like your
Who
way of
doesn't
work.
like you?
Are
Why
you
would
kidding?
someone not
Sean?
like you?
Sean's Irish and Puerto Rican from New York City. He's
Yeah.
going to
So what?
rub
I don't
people the
understand
wrong
what that.
way.
Who doesn't like him?
Because
I'll
again,
beat them up if they don't like you. Why would
yes,
someone
well,
not
yes.
like you?
Well, the truth hurts
I
for a lot of people.
I forget how like number wonky you are sometimes. Like I forget how like statistical kind of nerdy you can get. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. I look, there are people who don't like me. It definitely is a thing. And a lot of people, and I see it in the chat, we'll talk about like root causes of crime and all this stuff. And here's the thing. I'm not all that concerned about root causes, because unless the root cause is the most efficient way to address the problem, then we're not then it's not even productive to focus on. The example I always like to give is earthquakes, right? Earthquakes are a big problem in the state of California. Now, if I gave you $10 billion to deal with earthquakes, like, what would you spend the money on? My guess is most of you out there would say that you would spend it on earthquake proofing buildings, schools, and all of that. But we know, unlike crime, where the root cause is actually not as straightforward as poverty, I hate to break it to you guys, but we know the root cause of earthquakes. It's shifting tectonic plates. But the thing is, us trying to get a grasp of how the Earth's crust moves, like these tectonic plates move,
Right.
is so much more expensive and possibly even impossible that it's just not efficient to try to address the problem at the root cause. Like, this is called the causal fallacy, and I believe this is also true in terms of crime. If the most efficient way of dealing with crime is like putting like a murderer behind bars so he doesn't reoffend, that's what I'm going to be in favor of. Like, we can
Right.
talk about poverty, but I actually think poverty gets relieved when you drive down the crime rate. Look at, and I know like it's considered to be very authoritarian because they passed, by the way, our incarceration rate. Look at El Salvador. Their economic numbers, like their economic growth since their locking up of their gang members, it's insane. And that's because these people were consuming something like 15% of the total economy every single year. They were extorting over 70% of businesses. Like, I may not agree with everything Bukele is doing, but I 100% understand how if I was in a country with that was the most dangerous in the world, where that was happening to my economy, it was driving tourists away, and the gang members had switched from just overall blatant violence against people to massacres in order to make political change that worked. I understand why they're doing that. So yeah, and like, look at the numbers. The proof in the pudding is in the taste.
Yeah, and people say, okay, well, I don't like him, but I respect him. But how can you not like someone that you've never really met? What you're saying is you don't agree with his politics, but I don't understand how people make this be personal. Like, I don't understand what that has to do with anything. I can like lots of people.
I think as long as we do what we do, even though we're
Well, I
probably
like
one of
you.
Yeah, I like it too. And even though we're probably one of the only left channels that really, in any capacity, attempt to have these conversations, especially with people on the political right, I have to say I look forward to the day that you can actually debate Emma Vigeland without there being any distraction and really being able to share your piece, which you had
She
every
won't
right to
even
do.
respond to my text. So good luck to
Yes,
you with
well,
that.
listen, Tim is very good at this game, and we respect him for that. And Jen's been on his show.
I have no, I mean, I don't agree with him
Yeah.
on a lot. I do agree with him on some things. It's not a big deal. And I like
But I
him
think
too.
that,
He's very nice.
yeah, but I think that that's really,
Can I address this exact example from Travers Wolf? So
Yes.
it's that, do you treat the symptoms or the cause, doctor? And it depends.
Both.
The answer is it
Both.
totally depends. So for instance, if you have HIV, like, if we could cure HIV, would that be better? 100%. But one of the things we do is we treat the virus to prevent it from progressing into AIDS.
Correct.
Because like we do treat the symptoms, because sometimes, and by the way, people with HIV, I know like it is a scary thing. They're able to live very full lives, and like you can make it to the point where it's not even I believe they call it non-detectable. So like, yeah, you can treat the symptoms for sure.
There you go. Dano likes your politics, not your accent.
Thank you.
Sean, the floor is yours. How can people find you? Where they
Everyone
can track
knows where to
your
find
work?
you. Where are you,
Well,
Sean?
maybe they do. You know, we have some supporters too that don't know who he is. So let's pretend like that's the case.
You can find me on youtube.com/actual justice warrior. I'm on Twitter at I am Sean90, like SEAN90. And I'm on Instagram at actual justice, which by the way, just means I don't know how to consistently brand across all platforms.
Well, whatever you're doing,
Thank you so
you're
much
doing
for
it
coming
well.
on and chatting. I always like talking to you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on. And by the way, thank you for being very polite as you guys have been trying to rap for like 20 minutes for letting the conversation
No,
continue.
I don't care. Honestly, but if you keep these numbers up, we could go. Like, I mean, this is good numbers for us.
You definitely helped
I'm
us out a
good.
lot. And as far as I'm concerned, it shows that there's a lot of common ground, and that finding that common ground is key in anything that we do. It's been a hallmark in many ways of what we try to do, and an antithesis of what
Thank
basically
you,
everybody else
Dano.
does.
I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Sean.
Thanks,
thank you
Sean.
for having me.
Talk to you, brother.
Yeah,
Always a great conversation.
Yeah, no, and I'll talk to all different people. I don't have to agree with people on all sorts of things
Should.
to have a conversation.
I mean, that's like, but I would encourage other people to do the same. And of course, when you're doing it, make sure that you are doing it in conjunction with trying to have an honest conversation. Remember, a lot of times,
well, people do it to sabotage. People do it to ambush. People want to debate. They want theater. They want clicks. I am interested in none of those things.
No, what we are interested is transforming politics into service. Now, of course, that's not an easy thing to do, and it may not be the sexiest thing in the world that you hear of. Like we're not a gossip channel. We're not here.
It is not as sexy as Sean Fain. Sean.
Well, Jen has a crush on the union leader himself, who's really working on behalf of people.
And he kind of also reminds me of my law school professor, John Teeter. Greatest law school professor, who also was a labor law professor.
For those of you who are new and follow our channel, as I said,
we are demonetized.
Politics in the service. We have a serious problem. Unfortunately, Jen has some theories as to why this has been the case for the past 2 months, but we are demonetized.
We'll see, because now we're going to see what she does to retaliate to what I said in the beginning of the show. Because I called her flat out. There's going to be a repercussion for that.
I have no doubt there will be. So if you are
already demonetized,
to become a supporter for as little as $5 a month over Patreon. Of course, any support, you get yourself the Lulu sticker. Jennifer.
I have it. Oh, by the way, guys, and I don't know if I'm going to have any leftovers, but I actually went on and created. I didn't tell you this, Peter. It's the cutest thing. I created a Halloween Lulu sticker that we are going to give out at our trunk or treat events. And it's Lulu with this witch's hat sitting on this little broom. It's the cutest thing. And we are doing a couple of trunk or treat events with the kids, so they will also get that. But yes, that's the Lulu sticker. We don't have a $10. $10 a month gets you, as of right now, a Lulu sticker and my undying appreciation.
Well, that means a lot. And if you are so much as generous to donate $25 to the campaign, and of course, I said campaign. I don't know why I said that, but
because it's just flight of tongue.
So, because I was at a campaign event today, which we're going to talk a little bit more before we wrap.
Having a campaign. We're having a campaign to get my bodily autonomy back. That's what
that's what we are working on. And this upcoming weekend, Jen and I will be canvassing our local area again.
I agree. Agreed, Travers.
Yes. And so if you do not want to put your credit card on the grid and are so inclined to contribute, but don't want to. It
helps us, guys. It really does. Like, we're definitely scraping. I mean, I joke about being demonetized, and we certainly weren't making a lot of money on Google, but it was like, we'd get like 160, maybe a couple $100 a month or whatever, which was enough to sort of help us be paying, producer and somebody to help us do our video clips. I mean, it's like, we don't get a salary from this. And hopefully not have to dip into personal funds to use to do things, which we do anyway. So
make sure you can swing over to Cash App, $Jen Change, and you can make a direct contribution that way. And any and all support would mean a lot. Now, with that said, John, I don't know what you're talking about, because we are here talking about what Israel is doing wrong. not that what they're doing is
Wait,
correct.
your title is absurd. Israel declares war on Hamas and Palestine. Yeah, I don't think you must have just come on. Go back and watch the beginning. Go back to the beginning of the show. You're preaching to the converted here.
Yeah, so this is the lovely clip of our wonderful producer Colin.
And I didn't write the title. Peter did. Blame it on him.
So this actually Colin wrote the title. So neither of us did it.
Yeah, Colin. I'm going to revoke your tribal membership card.
Yeah, well, yeah, he ain't losing. No Irish person is losing sleep over that. So here is a clip of what corporate media put out regarding Israel-Palestine.
According to reporting by Al Jazeera, the leader of Hamas has said the group is on the verge of a great victory after its incursion into Israeli territory. Political leader Ismail Haniyeh has blamed the violence squarely on Israel's occupation of Palestinian land. For another Palestinian viewpoint, I wanted to bring in Dr. Mustafa Barghouti.
I represent a democratic Palestinian movement called Palestinian National Initiative, which is non-Fatah and non-Hamas. But I think this situation that has evolved is a direct result of the continuation of the longest occupation in modern history. Israeli occupation of Palestinian land since 1967. This is 56 years of occupation that has transformed into a system of apartheid, a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa. Yes, maybe Hamas did not recognize Israel, but the PLO did, and the Palestinian Authority did. What did they get? Nothing.
Let me ask you about the practical reality of what's going to happen here, which you know because you've lived through this, which is this is going to strengthen right-wing forces in Israel. It is going to strengthen the forces that say have no mercy, have a huge military response. Presumably, the life of Palestinians in the West Bank will get harder, more checkpoints, more searches. Isn't the practical effect here of all this going to be much worse for the average Palestinian?
Unfortunately, Farid, what you have described is exactly what we already have. Today, the whole West Bank is paralyzed by 560 military Israeli checkpoints. And these checkpoints were there during the last 30 years. We are suffering from a wall that is built on our land. The whole West Bank has been divided in 224 small ghettos, separated from each other. And the settlers are everywhere attacking Palestinians. You speak about right-wing government in Israel. Already Israel is a right-wing government. Israel is already having fascists in its government. Smotrich described himself as a fascist homophobe.
Yeah, Farik, because they'd rather die on their feet than live on their knees. That's why. Because their lives are so bad there based on their oppression that this is all they've got. Like, it's amazing to me that given what we've learned from how we've treated indigenous people in the past, that we still can't see how this is going to go. It's not going to end well for anybody. And yes, I know they're going to incur even greater wrath and greater violence for doing. They know that. So they should just sit there and take it. We should just sit there and be in open air prison.
And credit to Farid for having him on, at least. I mean, I can imagine that.
I will say I was surprised to see that on CNN. And also shout out to Democracy Now! I mean, I don't always love everything about them, but they definitely do a very good coverage, I believe. Democracy Now! Does the most, I think, very balanced coverage of what's going on.
And I think what a lot of people miss, and this is what we said at the beginning to kind of bring that conversation full circle, and we'll close with RFK. It's very interesting how a lot of people kind of lose sight of this reality when it comes to this issue here. It's sort of the same deal when it comes to the war in Ukraine, is that the only thing that people can see, at least in terms of the corporate media narrative that is being espoused, that people pay attention to, is simply this. Israelis were killed, and they were killed by Hamas. They don't need a narrative. They don't need a story. They just know that that happened, and it was horrific, and it was wrong. But to nuance it and explain how it led to something like that. Very much the same circumstance of Putin, and it's not even Russia.
Yeah.
It's Putin invaded Ukraine.
Right.
And
Putin invaded Ukraine, just himself.
I don't have time for nuance. I don't have time for explanation. I am a small-minded American, and I need my information like fast food. Give it to me quick. I don't want to even know what's in it. 100%.
They like sound bites, and they also like dichotomy. They like teams, and we're just gung ho Israel. And I've got to say, look, I grew up in like Tribe Central, and my feed. And by the way, and people know I am not on social media like in terms of politics. I am not on social media for politics. My social media account is for my little art business. And so a lot of my friends and people on social media are people I grew up with and family, and, because I use it for art business and whatever. And I got to tell you, the onslaught of the Israeli flag on social media was suffocating, and I won't engage. I'm not engaging. That's not the use of that particular handle, and I'm not doing it. But it's very, very frustrating to me that people have no concept of context.
Look, it is what it is. People are very fearful, and they understand that there is still a heavy dose of anti-Semitism that exists, and there is also a very violent, destructive pattern that comes with it. It's like saying on the one hand that you support the Jewish people of Israel, but you don't support the Israeli government. And even having that distinction is something that people they can't even hear that, which for whatever reason has allowed them to convince themselves that they are of the righteous, self-righteous, and completely infallible. As a result,
they will be. They are on the wrong side of history. I have no doubt about that. I am very comfortable in that assessment. The people that are still the Zionists, you're on the wrong side of history. We were lied to. We now know we were lied to. So now we need to rectify the situation. Stop living in mythology. Please, I am begging you to stop living in mythology. And for people who don't know, like I have just recently been, I have had the realization, and this has been very hard for me, which has definitely caused me a certain level of rage. I have recently realized that I was used as a tool of ethnic cleansing. And for people who don't know what the Jewish National Fund is, it's basically the Zionist, we're the ones causing the desert to bloom. And the JNF is how everyone, when you plant your trees, and it's the Jewish National Fund, and it's all about the preservation of the Jewish state, blah, 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 blah. So when I was in high school, I did this program called High School in Israel, which is also part of JNF. JNF also is part of what I now call Clan Camp, otherwise known as Birthright, to entitled white Ashkenazi Jews, where they get to go over there and see their birthright that they're entitled to. But so like when I see all of this, the level of frustration is off the charts. But yes, I was used as a tool in ethnic cleansing. One of the things that we do on those trips to Israel as good little Zionists is we go and we plant trees. And in doing a lot of my research, it has occurred to me that wherein we plant trees was in places that were demolished Palestinian territory. And why we plant trees, and if anyone's ever wondered this, why are they always planting trees? Israel planting trees. It's all about planting trees. Yeah, because they went in and destroyed all the greenery and trashed all the crops and the agriculture and the thriving civilization that was there. They trashed it and turned it into rubble. So then they had to plant trees. This is like a huge point of contention for me. I am extremely enraged about it, which is why it's like these Zionists have no idea. Hell hath no fury than me finding out I've been used in ethnic cleansing. And so this is a very big problem.
I think that's a fair point. I think it's also fair to examine, as Dano has suggested, whether or not this was an actual, deliberate coordinated attack. And what we mean by that is not necessarily, so much as what Hamas did, which clearly was a very methodical, coordinated attack that probably was several months, possibly even several years in the making in terms of preparation. But the big question here becomes, did the Biden administration have any foreknowledge of this coming? I am always of the mind that they do, because the military-industrial complex is all-knowing and all-seeing, and almost everything that exists in the world is surrounded around this idea of endless war, because it is as profitable as anything on this planet. And
manufacturing consent, is that what you're thinking?
Well, I don't even want to get into the conspiratorial notion that because
that's not a conspiratorial thing.
What I'm alluding to is this idea that the general population as a whole has really soured on the idea of continued war of aggression in Ukraine and wanting to get to the negotiating table, especially since it's been reported on paper. Of course, we all know that those numbers are always lighter than they really are, that over 500,000 Ukrainians have been killed already. And so when you take that into account, and say, would you like to kill another 500,000 to try to win this war? Well, you know what? In their mind, they think they can win it, but that's neither here nor there. So this is whole, well, if we can't sell this one, maybe we can sell this one. And there's no comparison between the support of Ukraine versus, if you thought the support for Ukraine was strong, you have seen nothing compared to the support for Israel.
Well, and here's something I would posit. This is something I would posit, which sort of goes back to something that I think, You Don't Like My Music was saying before, which was, if, greater prisons and stronger, police made us safer, we would be the safest country in the world, right? So I look at Israel and I'm like, we're always told Israel's this, it's that, it's that. If Israel is not safe now, they're never going to be. That's another thing. If they can't be kept safe, then they're not going to be kept safe. And you're not going to be able to do this. You cannot have both an oppressive, apartheid, racist regime and not have military suppression of those people. So in order to have a racist country, you have to be an oppressor and you have to use military might to keep the oppressed away. That's by definition. There's no other way to do it. So you have the authority on violence in the state of Israel. You own it. So that is how it goes. And by the way, state of Israel, that is who dictates the level of violence. The oppressor dictates the level of violence, not the oppressed.
And they have come back tenfold and then some.
Oh, well, and they will continue. Travers, Max is great on this. And Max has spent considerable amount of time in Gaza and actually really knows his shit. He really does. So, I mean, a lot of people take issue with him on a lot of things, but when it comes to, I can say he has done the research on this. He has spent a lot of time in Gaza, which most people are not able to go to Gaza.
No,
that's time there.
Well, that's also why we would love to get friend of the show, Ronnie Kalik, back on to talk about what's going on. But we, as we've mentioned, for those of you who are
right?
Yeah, for those of you who are new here, we typically live stream. As of this moment, we may change the format altogether, but we'll see. Right now, we're doing one night a week and 1 day per week. So we live stream on Mondays and Thursdays. And so this Thursday, we will be going live at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And our guest, a guest that Jen has really wanted to get on the show for a long time.
Well, he's one of many people that I have been wanting, and he lives abroad.
Yeah.
Wait, where is he though? I think he's in the UK. Where is he?
I think Omar is in Beirut, if I'm not mistaken.
He's in Beirut. Oh, so he's with near Rania. Okay.
Yeah, he's very close. He's very close to the region. And so Omar Hadar, who is a very noted expert on Israel Palestine, he was actually on CNN. I want to say, he was on there earlier this morning. So yeah, he's making the rounds, and so he's going to join us. We may turn it into a panel. I thought about reaching out to Norman Finkelstein. We'll see if that would potentially work in this case, but I know that he's considered a very controversial voice in the Jewish community.
He is, which at this point that ship sailed here. I'm pretty much over that at this point. That doesn't matter. And another person that if you wanted to reach out to would probably be Rabbi Rosen. Would probably be happy to come on and talk about it. Like, if
you know what, that actually would be great. Yeah, you know what, if you can reach out to Rabbi Rosen, that would be a great.
You just have to do it through Gen Change email.
Okay,
that's the thing. Right. Yeah.
So,
I bet you he'd be happy to come on. And just remember the time zone thing with him.
Very interesting take there, Base Chat Thunder Jock. But welcome to the channel. We're glad to have you.
Well, then here's the thing though, but I'm an anti-war athist. What about that?
Yeah.
How about that kind of voodoo? What about that kind of voodoo to be an anti-war atheist?
And it looks like we're now officially on Rumble. So you guys will find us there. You'll find our work popping up.
We have been demonetized, guys. We have been demonetized on YouTube. Apparently, we have the opportunity to get remonetized at some point in November. But the reality is, if it can happen, it's just going to happen again, especially after tonight.
Yeah. Generally speaking, we don't do streams this long. Usually we go about an hour and a half to 2 hours max.
Rabbi Rosen from Tzedakah in Chicago. It's Tzedakah Synagogue, Tzedakah congregation. I don't remember. He's awesome. We've had him on a couple of times. We have covered the Zionism issue many times here. It's an ongoing theme in my life as I'm trying to like repair my psyche. From
I think it's necessary. It's very necessary to talk about it now. Probably more so because of the fact that you are going to have people paying attention. You can't really address it in the first 48 to 72 hours because everyone is on pins and needles. They're angry. There's no rational thinking, but eventually people need to listen and need to hear. And so in this case, that will be important. And Sam, we love you. Really means a lot.
Thank you, Sam. October 27th, meet us. I'm going to give you the details. Dania Beach, trunk or treat, wear a costume. And thank you, Based. You know what? Truly religious people believe that. I appreciate that.
Yes.
I have a lot of friends that are very God religious people. That's no beef.
So we are going to close sort of as we opened, but I was in Philadelphia today for a lot longer than I thought I would be there. I happen to have been able to acquire a press pass for early access to RFK's.
We should do that from now on, by the way.
Sure. Yeah, for any of these events. But
yes.
I was able to get a press pass to RFK's event. And if I get some time, I wrote down some notes and I texted it to Jen, but, kind of like an overall synopsis of what the experience is like. What I can tell you about the crowd that showed up in Philadelphia today, and we're going to play a clip in just a minute. It was a very eclectic crowd. It was a mix of a lot of different people, predominantly white, to be fair. But
how did it compare to a typical Trump crowd?
Well, here's what I would say. All corners of the political spectrum were there. You had left hippie types all the way to conservative business types and everything in between. You had people of great affluence. You had people that were successful in business. You had working class or even, just outright kind of nomadic.
Was there any racial spectrum whatsoever? Or
there
was
was
it pretty
one
white?
person. There was one person in the crowd who was, chanting "Free Palestine" and really gave it to Rabbi Shmuley when he spoke.
Oh, okay, people, do not you don't even say it. Don't say his name. I hate that man. I really do.
It's a trigger
I don't
word.
hate him as a person. Whatever. I don't want. It's not the best image. It's not. Yeah, he wrongs me as a Jew.
I am going to allow you guys to, and credit to Colin. Various clips were put together today. Exceptional pro shots were done. Overall, I think it was pretty strong, and I think the message is going to resonate. But buckle up for a few minutes, guys. RFK is officially a candidate for president of the United States, running as.
I hope you clip this down so it's not like too long, right?
Sit back and enjoy, young lady.
We do face an entrenched political corruption and an inequality of wealth not seen in a century. But the good news is that people like yourselves are finally fed up. Something is stirring in us that says it doesn't have to be this way. People stop me everywhere at airports, at hotels and malls, on the street, and they remind me that this country is ready for a history-making change. They are ready to reclaim their freedom, their independence. And that's why I'm here today. I'm here to declare myself an independent candidate. That's not all. I'm here to join you in making a new Declaration of Independence for our entire nation. We declare independence from the corporations that have hijacked our government. And we declare independence from the Wall Street, from big tech, from big pharma, from big ag, from the military contractors and their lobbyists. And we declare independence from the mercenary media that is here to fortify all of the corporate orthodoxies from their advertisers and to urge us to hate our neighbors and to fear our friends. Today, as the corrupt powers have overtaken our government, the ranks of the dispossessed have swelled so that they not only include indigenous Americans and Black Americans and Hispanic Americans, they include tens of millions of people who live paycheck to paycheck in financial desperation. The dispossessed also include the legions of the chronically ill, of the addicted, the depressed, the 80% of our country that cannot afford a middle-class lifestyle. A rising tide of discontent is now swamping our country. People ask me, can you win? And I want to turn that question back on you. Will our movement win? Democracy doesn't come about as a gift from oppressive elites and authorities when they finally relent. Democracy comes when people choose to exercise their power. And so I'm asking you today to join me in exercising the sovereign choice of a democratic people. Are we ready to win?
Yeah, no, I appreciate what he's doing. Look, to me, if the Democrats would have had a primary, this wouldn't have been the case, but no, and they wouldn't have a primary. And so I appreciate the democracy of it. I don't necessarily, he's not my candidate, but I appreciate him.
What I said, and you don't like my music, brings up a good point, and this is what I would say to anybody. His speech actually wasn't good. It was borderline great. He obviously still has an issue with his speaking, but it is drastically improved.
It bothers me a lot less than it used to.
Well, he's improved it. There's no question that he has.
He's probably working with
He had vocal coach. He has to. He doesn't have a choice. And that's Cheryl probably in his ear that you need to do that. He is if you put him up against Trump and Biden, he is going to look very appealing to a lot of people. And that is something you have to understand. This is
not that three-way race.
Yeah.
I'm RFK. There's no way. I don't see any other, if that were the three-way race, but you know where I am.
I'm not. Yeah. I mean, listen, this is not to take anything away from Dr. Cornel West. And
that's Dr. Cornel West is my guy.
Yeah, so we certainly hope that his independent run is also strong. But the reality is that Bobby Kennedy is a very charismatic, very empathetic, a very knowledgeable, and a very likable individual. And I was there for somewhere between 6 and 8 hours today. And I rubbed elbows with a lot of different people of considerable affluence in many cases, including one such individual who I will not name, who I will tell you freely admitted that he was an anti-vaxxer and that his kids are not vaccinated. There was not a lot of that in the room, thankfully, but there are people who are in that movement. And a lot of those people in that movement have a lot of money and have a lot of influence. And there was a lot of people that were there today who have millions upon millions of dollars to give, and they're going to give it to him. There's a lot of people who believe that this country is at a breaking point and that he is the right candidate at the right time. Could it be because he's a Kennedy? Could it be because he has name ID? Could it be because that he is very knowledgeable about a myriad of issues that a lot of people agree, even disagree on? I think at the end of the day, if he's on the ballot, he is definitely banking on this idea that even if you dislike me or disagree with me on a number of things, if you line me up against Biden and against Trump, or quite frankly, whoever else it might be, it could be in one case DeSantis and Newsom. And if you put RFK up as the candidate in that instance, he is going to do a lot better than I think people think. And that to me is what it comes down to. For Dr.
Good.
West, the biggest issue, without question, the biggest issue for Dr. West is that he has had a lot of missteps from the very beginning. And some of it is, self-inflicted. In other instances, just having bad people around him. Dr. West is,
that's not his only problem.
Dr. West is not going to be able to raise a tenth of the money that Bobby's going to be able to raise. And so
he'll have
as
more
a result,
people power if it's done properly.
If it is done properly. But I think that there is something to be said for if again, Bobby has a number of issues that he's going to have to address. The two most noteworthy are Israel. Yeah, Israel and healthcare. Those are the two big ones. I think he would be a lot easier to get on healthcare, if for no other reason, because he is very much taking it directly to Big Pharma, which lends to this idea of you have to, if you want to get progressive fervor backing you up, you must support a single payer universal healthcare system. That is the only answer at this point. And that's
the
really,
Israel thing is a problem. And as somebody in the chat pointed out, that Kim Iverson has addressed this and has said that that was something that, drew her away from him. And, it's definitely a point of contention for me. We did reach out. I emailed, reached out to him to invite him to come on the show to discuss this. I don't want to ambush him. I want to educate him.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Well, I think we've definitely, and something that just came across the AP, so all of you guys know just how much both parties are irredeemable. California Governor Gavin Newsom has vetoed a bill aimed at limiting the price of insulin. So I don't want to hear anything from anybody when it comes to the real issues that affect everyday people as to whether or not one party or the other, especially ones that are seeking the highest power. If you line by line item between Newsom and DeSantis clearly takes the cake with the 6-week abortion ban. But I can assure you that when you look at the economic bills that are passed in both states, Florida and California, in this big debate that these guys are going to have in a month, I guarantee you that if you took the D and the R away from the names, you wouldn't know the difference because most of it's all the same. And
it's all the same. But the bodily autonomy thing is not a small thing, right? Like I generally do not it's not, the idea of this one issue voter, but it's a pretty big issue. It's not like it's, just like to me, the Palestine thing is a pretty big issue. It's not something where, all right, well, we just don't agree on this aspect of, how to come up with, a plan for this or this, right? That's a pretty fundamental problem. And the healthcare thing is too, but at least if he had the right position on Palestine, then I kind of feel like, we could sort of work with him on the healthcare thing and kind of lure him over. And plus, I think that it's not as sort of incendiary of an issue at this point. It's a lot more acceptable. Whereas, I think that the Israel thing is a problem for him in terms of, and it depends on who he's appealing to. If he's going to really pull more people from, the GOP, then that's not going to be a problem. Then his stance on Israel isn't a problem and his stance on healthcare isn't a problem. But you're not going to be able to pull from the left with those things.
I definitely agree. And you have to be able to give the left a concrete, monumental issue that they are fighting for, because right now they have nobody that is fighting for them. And if, Bobby is, I made some really solid contacts at this event. I am cautiously optimistic we'll be able to get Bobby on the show.
That would be great.
We are, I think it'll be a conversation very much worth having, because listen, I don't want to pull, take shots at other people, but when it comes to any type of a left interview that's been given to him, I don't want to say it's been what I would consider to be a railroad job, but it definitely was not intended to be the type of conversation where I think they were necessarily trying to find common ground in the right way.
I have no reason to have a problem with him. I would like to teach him something. I think that he seems like a smart and reasonable person. I don't think he's a bad person. He definitely speaks truth to power. He's a good guy.
He's a good guy.
If you're going to call out big pharma, the military industrial complex, and you're going to start calling out like the big three financial giants, and you go after the deep state and all this stuff, like, I think that you're somebody that is I can work with that, right? Like that, somebody who has said he would pardon Julian Assange. These are things that are monumental.
Yeah, no, he's definitely
for the executive branch.
I agree.
That matters. But we have to talk to him about Israel.
I agree. And then, of course, aside from the fact that he's a civil libertarian, which I think we both are, and I think most people are, generally speaking anyway.
Well, on our chat, they usually are.
Yes. And so, of course, again, he's got the right disposition that I think is needed in this moment right now, because he doesn't come off as soft, even though he's soft in his rhetoric, but he comes off as a very competent individual. He's got a lot of his father and his uncle in him. There's no question about that. But
and I always remind people that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say the big issue for me, the determining factor here. And if you have a thought, I'll hold.
Well, I was just going to say, I always want to bring people back to what is the nature of the job. People are just so into this like cult of personality as to who we're going to vote for, but we don't look at what exactly is the job. So the job of the executive is not the same as the job of a legislator. They're different jobs. And so what you want is somebody for me to be a chief executive. Again, you do not have to agree with somebody on policy in order for them to be a good chief executive. They do not need to do that. If it is somebody who believes in things like democracy and justice, that's okay that you don't agree with them. If somebody who was even, let's say he was an anti-vaxxer, which I don't think he's an anti-vaxxer, but let's say he was, he's a kind of person that you think he's going to become president and all of a sudden say no vaccines for anybody. No, of course not. That's absurd. So it's like we need to elect people as executives who are reasonable, who are bright, who don't need to be the smartest person in the room, who listen to experts, and people who are generally wanting to help, basically, try to just facilitate the legislation, right? That's what we need. I don't need to agree with him. We don't need to be friends. Like, I wish people would understand what the actual job is that we're electing somebody to.
Before I make my comment, look, there are going to be issues with any healthcare system. But what we're advocating for in the United States is simply this: remove the for-profit middlemen from in between us and our doctors. That's the goal. Is that a single
we don't
payer?
Want them running it.
No, we don't want that. And that's the big difference.
We just want them funding it.
Yeah. And the best overall health system in the world by all metrics is in France. And the reason why the French have the best of all the systems that are available is because they have a public system with a private marketplace. If you want to buy supplemental insurance or something else because you have a desire to get a rhinoplasty, for example, fine, that's not a problem. If you need to visit the doctor because you're sick, if you need to go to the hospital because you're injured or need life-saving medicine or treatment, you should be able to do that. And it should be part of the single payer funded tax system. That is the simplest way to do it. It is the most cost effective. It is the most responsible. It is the most productive. There's no getting around it. And so that's the target goal. We want government funded, not government run. There is a huge difference. And again, the problem with American politics is that we're not allowed nuance. So that in itself, I believe, has always been the biggest deterrent of them all, is this idea of, oh, no, you want the government to take over. Of course not. We don't want the government to take over. The government can't do shit. That's the problem in this country. But remember, it's done on purpose. The government can't do shit in this country because corporate special interests own it. And their interests are the interest of a very, very small portion of this country. Yeah. Frankly, a very small portion of the world. I don't know what's going to come of this. The shock poll that came out showed that Bobby is at 19%. Trump and Biden are at 38%. But let me tell you something. If Bobby gets to 25% by the conventions next July, I got to tell you, he's a threat, a real threat. And I do not believe they will allow him onto the debate stage under any circumstances, no matter how high he's polling. They will figure out some excuse to say that he doesn't belong there. And they're probably going to stick to it if they can do that. Will they? You know, it remains to be seen. But if I can take one thing away, if you were to ask me, why would somebody lend their support to RFK? If you were just saying, listen, I disagree with him on this, I disagree with him on that, but tell me why I need to vote, I should vote for RFK. And I would say BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. That's the reason. The power.
He is speaking truth to power. And again, you know, that's not, again, we're not endorsing RFK. Dr. West is my candidate as of right this moment. So, but I do appreciate what he's doing. I appreciate that he has a lane that he's in. I've always appreciated more candidates in different lanes. So I respect that immensely. And shame on the Democrats for, you know, not recognizing that this could have actually been a good deal for them. And instead, they're going to get what they have coming.
We'll close on this note. You've always said that pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. Well, fact of the matter is, this hog that is the Democratic Party is finally going to get slaughtered because their pride allowed them to get the best of them. Their corporate influence got the best of them. They were convinced, against all rationale, that there was no way that anyone, especially a Kennedy, was going to step outside their party box and attempt to eat, regardless of all the heat that they're going to take.
I will admit it. I was surprised that he did it. I mean, I'm glad that he did it, and I think it's an important step, like to take a stand against a duopoly. But I am surprised. I think that people don't realize how big of a deal it is.
And that's what I would say to anybody. This is my clear, you know, that this is the closest thing to an endorsement, because I don't support RFK. But what I do support is what he's doing, 1,000%. I think this country is in a very bad place. I think it's only getting worse. And I think we were heading right for the cliff without somebody like him coming in and saying, there's another path. There's another exit ramp that you can take, and you can take it now. And I really do believe that he is going to be a much bigger threat than a lot of people anticipate. And the reason I feel that way, as I've alluded to, is that you've got two terrible candidates at the top of the two major parties. I think that the economy is only getting worse, whether it is by inflation or by job opportunity. The planet is on fire. We now have two brewing endless wars in the Middle East, which is unbelievable. And you have an economy that is now working even worse in this administration than it was under Trump. So something's going to give. And whether this is just one of several major changes that are going to come as a result of Bobby now getting into the race.
I'm scared for his safety. And Sam said something in the chat, and I am too. I'm concerned for his safety. And fortunately, he is in a privileged enough position that he can afford to pay for security.
Yes, he can.
And so, you know, that's something that he can do. But it does very much bother me that the government will not, that the, he hates when I say Joe, but it's the executive branch will not sign off on Secret Service for him. And that bothers me immensely.
There is no question that the security detail that he had was top notch, very serious, no messing around whatsoever. But that costs a lot of money. And there were dozens of agents that were there to help him. And there were also eyes in the sky that you could see, and then there were ones that you couldn't see. And that's what you have to do. But like I said, it was probably about a solid 3,000 to 4,000 people that showed up. It was definitely a good crowd. Will he get Bernie-like numbers? Like I said, if he really wants it, he's got to tweak his campaign to some degree.
I mean, he's in the crosshairs of so many. I mean, he's real. I mean, he is now in the crosshairs of big finance, the deep state, and the Democratic Party. It's like, I mean, that's a pretty precarious. I'm concerned for him.
We'll see what happens. Tune in on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. As we said again, it's going to be
accommodating. We are speaking.
Omar Hadar.
Omar. And he is in Beirut. So we will be accommodating him and having an afternoon stream on Thursday so that they don't have to be up in the middle of the night.
Yes. And we are looking to basically, at least going forward, doing one afternoon show and one night show. We appreciate each and every one of you that have stuck around. Remember to smash that like button, subscribe, contribute, and share.
Yes, share.
Yes.
Subscribe.
Sam, Nadia, Bill, all of you guys, Travers, I can list all of your names. You guys are fantastic. JT Drum Shop, I don't recognize you, but I'm glad you're here. We're glad that everybody's here.
Yeah.
Teresa, obviously one of our best, Holly Horn.
And Teresa, thanks for signing up as a patron. I appreciate.
Yes.
And she is one of the people that has declined getting anything, which is really sweet.
Based Chad Thunderjock, we're glad to have you here.
Yes.
We're glad to have all of you here. But of course, most of all, we're always happy to see Sam that is here. And
Sam, Dania Beach, October 27th at that, the park in Dania. It's a trunk or treat. You always
smash that like button, subscribe, share, do all those things we ask you to do. We appreciate you all. It really means a lot. We'll see you Thursday.
Bye, y'all.